This happened when I was in college. So, I was home in the summer, just working. My boyfriend was also home for summer, working, living with his parents, about an hour and a half away. But we finally had a rare day when neither of us needed to work, so he drove down to spend the day with me. We were saving for the coming school year, so we tried not to spend too much, which ended up meaning that we ate lunch and dinner with my family at my house. After dinner, wanting to get some alone time as a couple, we decided to pick up root beer floats at Sonic and drive out to a local state park where young couples like to hang out. We parked and walked out to one of the little covered picnic tables in the woods, and while the parking lot was well lit, because of how thick the woods were, it was quite dark sitting at the picnic table. We'd hung out there late into the night before, and we always felt perfectly safe. But for some reason, though, I just felt a bit nervous sitting in the dark that night. So when another couple popped out of the woods past where we were and started making out, leaning up against the other end of the table, we moved to my boyfriend's pickup. My boyfriend turned on the radio, and we sat in companionable silence, attempting to eat our ice cream before too much of it melted. Due to the heat, we actually had the windows rolled down. After a bit, the couple that we'd seen come out of the woods left. Looking around, I realized something odd, though. Although there were normally at least half a dozen vehicles parked in this particular lot on any given evening, we were now the only vehicle in sight. Even though I didn't think too much of it, and continued finishing up my float. But all of a sudden, I just got the worst feeling ever. You know that feeling when the hair stands on the back of your neck because you can feel someone just looking at you when you thought that you were alone? It started like that and just got way worse. I had the distinct feeling that I needed to run in the pit of my stomach, so I started looking around and realized my boyfriend was also looking around nervously. And about the same time, he noticed that I was doing it too. So I asked him if he had a bad feeling, and his reply was an emphatic hell yes, uttered as he started the truck and began to drive out of the park. Since we were facing into the park, we had to make a U-turn, and as we passed by the area where we'd been parked, a man stepped out of the edge of the woods. This happened on a Wednesday night, and about a week later, someone found bodies in those woods, just past where we'd been seated on that picnic table. When the crime was eventually solved, it came out that a man living in a shack on the property and working as a maintenance worker for the park had killed a couple the Saturday night after our experience. And the photo of the killer in the newspaper turned out to be the photo of the man that we'd seen step out of the woods and watch us leave that night. So, I'll try and keep this short. I used to live in a very rural area in Georgia, north of Columbus. My nearest neighbor was about 5 miles away, and today it's full of subdivisions and HOAs, but back then it was pretty much desolate. I often traveled into Columbus as I had friends there. We would often hang out by the river, and one night I happened to go to the Riverwalk by the river alone. As I got out of my car, I immediately just got a whiff of something rank. It honestly smelled like sulfur and bog water. And then a sense of dread just overtook me. I went into a full-blown panic attack that thankfully only lasted a couple of minutes. At the time, I was dealing with a lot of abuse that I experienced as a kid and going to therapy and whatnot, so I wasn't completely taken by surprise. But anyway, the feeling of dread passed, and I went down by the river and took a walk for a couple of miles. I eventually approached a bridge that was completely dark. There was a single light at the end of the bridge, so you couldn't really see anything on the bridge that well. But when I looked closer, I saw one figure on the bridge. This incredibly tall man who had to be over 6'6", wearing a large cowboy hat, and I could tell that he was looking right at me. And then I heard a splash, a big splash, which meant that something relatively large had hit the water. I freaked out at this, and I just decided to call it a night. I get back to my car about half an hour later, and I notice police cars and a fire truck passing in the distance. As I get in my car, I notice what appears to be the same man at the phone booth, about 100 feet away. He's looking at me, and I can make out more details of him now. He had a jet black, well-maintained beard and looked to be in his 40s, I'd say. I began driving home, though, and as I passed the county line in which my home resides, I almost swerved because I see a huge cowboy hat in the middle of the road. Eventually, though, I finally pulled into my driveway and saw the most horrific thing. My headlights shone on a dead turkey, but it wasn't just a dead turkey. This thing was eviscerated. Its throat was slashed and its innards were rearranged around it in a perfect circle, but there was little or pretty much no blood around it. I kind of just stopped there, and I had no idea how to proceed now. But eventually I woke up the courage to drive around the turkey murder crime scene, and I pull up to the house. But it was then that I discovered exactly where the blood went, because it was covering my front door. I called the police, and it took them a good hour to get there, which irked me, but as I was talking to the officer who had arrived, he said that half the force was handling a suicide that occurred at the Riverwalk that night. And yes, at that bridge where I heard the splash. So, for additional backstory, my brother was alone at my mum's house, probably to check on our dog Oscar, as both my mum and stepdad worked day jobs, or something along those lines anyway, when the light in our hallway just started turning on and off. My brother began recording in hopes to capture it on video, in which he succeeded. Now, after watching this video countless times, honestly, I'm stumped, and I believe that there's something beyond our knowledge happening here. Having lived in the house for over 2 years myself as well, the house does have weird vibes to it, but I've never personally witnessed something like this. There are 2 light switches that control the light, one closest to my brother and one down at the end of the hallway. You can see in the video it's on the left side of the wall, and you'll also see in the video that the light begins to turn on and off, and on 2 separate occasions, you can see the switch literally moving. The first time it goes down perfectly halfway, which is very odd to me and would be damn near impossible to recreate so perfectly with anything tied to the switch. The second time, which is much more obvious, the light slams down, in which my brother reacts appropriately by getting the F out of there. But I want to know what your thoughts and opinions on this video are, and I'm genuinely curious as to what you all think, as my mum still lives in that house and tells me of weird experiences that she's had in it. But anyway, here's the video.
Okay, so it's doing it again. That switch down there is on. You can see it past my shaking. This one is on, okay? It's... Mom. See what I mean? It's fucking... You can hear it. You fucking... Mom, nope, no.
So yesterday, Saturday morning, my kid, too, has been running out the back door and having us chase after her. It's a bit of a naughty habit and can be quite scary when she bolts out the door like that. So she did that again, and I ran out after her, saying her name and then wait for Mummy. She's just gone down the deck stairs and I'm right there behind her when there's these gunshots and a man running right in front of us in the alleyway behind my house, with a smaller silver handgun pointed down the alleyway behind him. He's in a black pleather jacket and green hoodie, scarcely older than a teenager, but has a determined or confident, unflappable air to him that just sends chills down my spine. I can't even describe it, but he's so close that there isn't time to do anything more than grab my child and duck behind the chicken coop. City hens are actually allowed here. I guess I figured that he'd just keep running down the alley and we could crouch there till he disappeared. Only he doesn't. He hangs a hard left and jumps my neighbour's fence, the neighbours whose yard borders my chicken enclosure. This guy walks within feet of us, starts to exit my neighbour's gate. Then, and this moment will stay with me for an eternity, he hears my toddler's scream crying, the only sound around at that moment, and he stops, with his hand on his gun, and turns to look for the source of the crying. I really can't hide any more than I'm hiding, and if he turns his head even an inch more, he'll definitely see us. Somehow, though, I squeeze and lean just enough out of sight that he just doesn't see us. There was something in his very calm energy that just petrified me. A shooter who just had a gun battle in the middle of the day in a family neighborhood seems to give absolutely no fucks, naturally, if others are hurt. But I had this horrible cold dread just all over me at that moment, that if he turned all the way and saw us, saw me, saw my expression, he would have had no choice but to have shoot me, because my face said, "I saw what you did." It was the most terrifying moment of my entire life so far. I felt perched between the utter peril and life, the breathing, screaming life in my arms. Would he turn that little gun on us? But somehow, incredibly, miraculously, amazingly, as though the pull of investigating the crime so close to him was suddenly overwhelmed by his desire to just get the hell out of Dodge. He puts his gun in his pocket, exits through the gate, runs across the street, jumps the across the street's neighbor's fence, and disappears. I smacked my kid's head in haste to get us back inside. "I'm sorry, kid," and, freaking out, pulled all the curtains and locked the doors, and then spent 10 long minutes getting put on hold by 911. When the cops arrived, I gave my eyewitness account, and my neighbor, who had been about to take out her trash and saw it all, gave the same account. They caught the guy that he was shooting at, but they never actually caught the shooter that I saw, and it still sends chills down my spine. I mean, what if he comes back? What if those bullets had struck my toddler running towards the shooter? A little girl was recently killed in the exact same way at a park that we frequent, sprayed with bullets from a gun battle in the middle of the day, in the middle of a playground. It just makes me sick to my stomach, and I'm not even sure that I want to live in this city or country anymore. About 7 years ago, I was 20 years old, going to college and trying to make a little extra money, and I picked up a job working in Flint, MI, as a live-in caregiver for a 98-year-old woman named Lillian, who had Alzheimer's. Honestly, I wasn't trained the way that I should have been to properly care for her. I did a lot of research, and I tried my best to learn everything that I could to make the situation as comfortable as possible for her. Needless to say, though, I did get frustrated sometimes. One of those times was a hot summer night, probably around 2 a.m, when I awoke to Lillian screaming from her bedroom. I ran to her to find her sitting in her laundry basket. After helping her up, I also noticed that she had unfortunately wet herself. I took her to the bathroom to get her cleaned up, and she told me that she thought that the laundry basket was the toilet, and after she had sat in it, she couldn't get out. I felt really sorry for her, obviously. I tried my best to reassure her that it would be okay. I told her that I would clean everything up, run her laundry again, and stay up the rest of the night, just in case she needed anything. Once Lillian fell back to sleep, I threw her laundry in, and I decided that I had time to sneak out for a quick cigarette. Yes, I'm one of those nasty, horrible smokers. So I decided to sit in my car to use the air conditioning to stay cool, and call my best friend to see if she was still up so I could vent a little. Also, I just wanted to talk to someone as it was late at night and I was alone in my car. Being female, we're wired to be nervous about being alone at night, unfortunately. So, I hadn't been on the phone for more than 2 minutes, I'd say, when I just got a weird feeling. Something was just telling me to look over my left shoulder, and when I did, I saw a younger guy, maybe late teens, early 20s, walking down the sidewalk in my direction with a sweatshirt on. His hood was up, and remember too that this is in the middle of summer, so immediately I felt as though something was off. But I reasoned, who am I to say that this guy isn't cold? One of my flaws is being too afraid to hurt people's feelings, even when the situation calls for it. I knew in that moment that I needed to lock my doors, but I didn't want this guy to hear the sound of my doors locking and feel like I thought that he was a criminal just for walking down the sidewalk like that. My body is screaming warning signs at me. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, and it felt hard to breathe. I knew my friend was still talking, but I couldn't really hear a word that she was saying. I was afraid to turn my head to see where he was, and I was just frozen. when suddenly my friend's voice became clear to me and she was yelling at me, "Hey, why aren't you answering me? What's going on?" I turned my head to the right, just in time to see him reaching for my passenger door handle. Without even having time to think, I somehow managed to reach up with my left hand and hit the lock button for the doors just as he started pulling at the handle. His right hand was in the front pocket of his sweatshirt. He seemed to be holding onto something, and with his other hand, he was pulling at my handle with such force that the entire car was jerking back and forth. I didn't move, I didn't scream, I just kind of watched him. I remember his eyes staring straight into mine, and man, he looked angry. Just as I started to think that this is it, he's going to get in somehow, he's going to hurt or kill me, he just suddenly stops. He stood there for a quick second and then turned and ran away. In that moment, I just burst into tears. I was scared, angry, and confused. I mean, what the hell just happened? What was he trying to do? Kill me? Steal my car? Is he going to come back? And lastly, even though I was happy about it, why did he suddenly stop and just run away like that? I called 911 and the dispatcher asked me if there was any way for me to leave the area. I wanted to, but then I realized, Lillian. I needed to get back in that house, but I was terrified to step foot out of my car. I took a few deep breaths and I decided that I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to make sure that she was okay. I got back in the house and immediately went to her room, and thankfully, she was sound asleep. I felt a huge sense of relief when I saw her, and I took a walk through the house and checked all the doors and the windows to make sure that we were safe. Everything was secure, and I sat down on the couch in the living room in the dark and waited for the cops to come. For those of you who don't know much about Flint, this type of call is not their top priority at all. It took them over 4 hours to respond, and at that point, obviously, there is nothing that they can do, because he was long gone. I still think about that night more often than I would like to admit as well. The what-ifs are definitely the hardest part. All I know is that I hope to never be in a situation like that again. Well, a while back ago, I was maybe 16 at the time, and my uncle was getting married and my family loves him, so we flew to Mexico to go and celebrate. I got my hair done and wore a dress, so I looked nice. My uncle and my new aunt were happy, so after a week, we went back home. Once I got home, I noticed a message from a stranger on Messenger, and also a friend request from the same guy. The text message read, "Hello, I'm your cousin, a relative of your mother. I saw you in the wedding." I found it strange, but he was confirmed family because he sent a selfie of himself in the wedding, also one in my grandma's living room. Also, his friends in common were also some of my aunts and my mum too, so I knew that he wasn't lying. Also, he's like in his mid-30s, so he was like an uncle, not really a cousin in my eyes. And he may have said that to seem younger. That's what I felt because he kept trying to seem younger in the texts. But anyway, I, being the nice person that I was, just said, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" And he texted back, "Nothing, just wanted to say hello." I texted back, "Pleasure to meet you," and he then texted me, "I hope I'm not bothering you by texting you. Tell me about yourself. Do you have a boyfriend? Are you married or single? How old are you?" I got a little uncomfortable about this, but I answered, "I don't have a boyfriend and I'm 16. He kept bringing up some musicians in order to have some connection with me. He said that he liked Katy Perry, not knowing that I was a punk kid. So I told him about the bands that I liked, and he said that we had similar music tastes, which honestly made me laugh seeing how untrue that was. He then asked me 3 times if I had a boyfriend, and then told me that he had no girlfriend, and also kept trying to talk about myself. We talked about movies that we liked. Again, for some reason he kept bringing up kids' films. I think that it was in hopes that it could be another thing that we had in common. But I was into horror films and sent him pictures of like Donnie Darko and Child's Play, and he then sent one of the Smurfs movie poster, once again saying that we have similar interests, or wanting me to agree with him. He then asked me if I worked out, and I said no. He then told me, "Sad that you don't live here. If not, I could have invited you to work out with me." I didn't respond, and he sent a picture of a lady. He told me that it was his ex of 4 years and that she was really hot, and in his words, he texted me back, "You are also very hot, Melissa." After that, I didn't text him ever again because I felt really uncomfortable. I didn't tell my mum too because, knowing her, she just wouldn't care. I haven't seen that guy since I haven't visited my grandma since that wedding. He also hasn't texted me since that, but it was just really creepy. Also creepy thinking about the fact that my own cousin may have been staring me down at the wedding and somehow found my Facebook account, which I really don't post pictures of myself in, thank God. This just happened to me in the bathroom at my college. So, I walked into the bathroom at my community college, and there's another guy in there, and he's at one of the two urinals. I walk in and step up to the other urinal, and from the moment that I walked in to the moment that I unzipped my pants, this guy was just staring at me. In my head, I thought, maybe this guy is on the spectrum or something, because our college has a lot of students that are special needs and is a great place for them to get a degree and has really good programs to work with them. So it felt a bit off, but I thought maybe it's nothing. And boy, do I wish that that was where the interaction ended. He finished before me, and he went over to wash his hands. I was just waiting for him to finish up and leave the restroom because it felt really weird. And while I'm still at the urinal and this guy is washing his hands, he looks at me and says, "You're a complete stranger, so you won't judge me. Is it wrong of me to take out my anger on people that I don't know?" My first thought was, this guy isn't right, but I should probably listen. But I answered and I said, "No, that's not right. That isn't healthy for you or the other person." He answers, "That's the conclusion that I've come to as well. Thanks." And he then just turns and walks out of the bathroom without even drying his hands. I don't know about this guy. I have a bad feeling about him, and I don't know what to do about this situation. So, I totally forgot about this happening until my mum brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night, and I'm scared all over again. So this was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mum had to drive me to the school. The road that my tiny neighbourhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of a long rural stretch that only had one equally tiny other neighbourhood and a few houses here and there. But it was 6 a.m. or something and still incredibly dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. And as we're pulling out of our neighbourhood, my mum and I both saw 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, at the entrance of the neighbourhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy, or 2 boys and 1 girl. I don't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt, kind of a dress outfit, and the boy was wearing a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. One, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colours anyway. Third, what young kids just stand there in single file line, not doing anything but just standing? No joshing around, no nothing. Oh, and lastly, this wasn't even where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. And just to sprinkle an extra bit of creepy on top for shits and giggles, there weren't any streetlights there, so what were they doing there? They were just seemingly standing in the dark, not doing jack except being creepy as hell, I guess. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side window where I was obviously sitting, and of course we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought at first that they didn't have any faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out to make it out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfit so vividly, by the way. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they actually had faces, but then got completely freaked out all over again when I saw their eyes were all completely black, kind of like Supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons all black. My mum actually saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and she just hightailed it straight out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was just too dark. My mum didn't go back home until the sun rose and it was bright enough to not get scared anymore. Of course, nobody believed me at school and my siblings thought that we were full of it. But we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though, and I thought that they were ghosts for some time, but a few months after that, I heard about the black-eyed children on YouTube or something, and I made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was like 4 years ago now, I think, and I had blissfully forgotten about it, until my mum said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I just want to die. And well, I hope my irrational anxieties and fears around children that are small enough for me to punt across a soccer field are amusing at least to some. So I'm a respiratory therapist and I work nights in an emergency room. I've been working in this field for a few months now and I've seen some pretty bizarre and weird things. So I'd figured that I'd share one of them in hopes to clear my head. I work in a decently large hospital in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. I mostly do work in the emergency room, but have also worked around the other floors of the hospital. Just the other night, in fact, a patient came in around 4 in the morning. It was an 18-year-old female who her family found standing on top of their shed in the middle of the night, and when her parents saw her and screamed, she fell and broke her femur. She came into the ER and I was told by her nurse to check in on her whenever she was settled in her room, so when I did, I was a little shocked when she was still in a daze and her leg was just torn to shreds. I could see it through the bandages, and when I walked in, she just stared and didn't say a word. I was about to introduce myself when all of a sudden she just lets out a scream, and not just any scream. It was a scream like that of an animal caught in a bear trap. After this, the nurse ran in and she started yelling numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, but in random order. And after this, she just passed out and went unresponsive. She got moved up to one of the basic care floors, and last night I went to check on her and she's doing okay. The weird thing though is that now she's like a completely different person. I don't know what happened to this poor girl, but it was scary to say the least. When I was a child, my parents and I lived in a really rugged trailer on the family farm. Shortly after that, the farmhands living in the farmhouse that was down the path through the woods moved out and we had the opportunity to move into an actual house. The trailer that we'd been living in had no plumbing or HVAC. We had an outhouse for using the bathroom and showering and whatnot. And to put it short, we pretty much lived like hicks. So at 7 years old, I was pretty damn excited to move into a house that had all of those things and a staircase for me to run up and down with. It even had a basement. My great-grandfather, alongside of a good friend, actually built the house with their bare hands in 1950. It was inscribed in the wall down in the basement. Now, to give a little bit of context, this friend of my grandfather's had fallen and hit his head hard on a rock during a snowstorm one night, heading back to the house and had fallen unconscious. His wife found him hours later and managed to wake him up and help him back home. But unfortunately, later that night, he died. My parents told me later, when I was much older, that strange things began to happen in that house not long after we moved in. They would wake up to small things like the faucets being turned on in the bathroom or the toilet flushing. The television would turn on in the living room and stuff like that. But then, things began to pick up. My mum would wake up sometimes to the sound of a man roaring in anger. After inquiring about all of these things to my grandfather, they learned of the family friend and his death. They soon learned to coexist with him, and it wasn't long before the spirit began to confront me. One of my earliest memories of an encounter with him was when I was 8. It was 2:30 in the morning. I've always been a bit of a light sleeper, so when I wake up in the middle of the night, I usually just brush it off. But this night, I felt just something strange in the air. Downstairs, I began to hear footsteps moving back and forth in the hallway. At first, I thought that it was just my dad, since he sometimes worked a 3 to 11 shift at the steel plant. But these footsteps didn't seem to be going anywhere, just kind of pacing. Then, after a pause, the footsteps began to make their way up the stairs towards my bedroom. My room was hardwood, so there was a gap underneath the door so you could actually see shadows underneath of it. And once the steps made it to the landing outside of my door, I could see the shadow of 2 legs. And the next thing I know, the doorknob began to slowly turn, and then my door slowly creaked open about 2 inches, just enough for someone to peer through. Suddenly, the shadows vanished, and I could see no one through the opening. I decided to be brave, and I got out of bed to see if anyone was still there. I slowly walked over to the door, and I threw it open, but when I did, there was nobody. Before moving out of that house, I had many more experiences with our family ghost. I learned that he was friendly and was only coming to check on me that night, and many nights to come as well. In a weird way, I kind of miss him, and I hope that he's found the other side. I won't lie though, that night that he came to my door, it scared the ever-loving crap out of me. This is a story from my childhood that has always stuck with me, and I wanted to share it and see what other people think. So my family and I had just moved into this new house. This was right after the housing market went way up in the 2000s. So the house that we were moving into was a complete dump because that's all that we could really afford in our school district. It had previously been a crack house. The windows were busted by the police, fence taken down by SWAT, needles in the garbage disposal, and it was just a complete dump. So my mum and stepdad were fixing it up before we finally moved in. We had a month to get out of the house that we were renting and get into our new house. My sister's dad would go over after work and paint. Well, we had to because everything was covered with graffiti. And he got home one night and he said, "When I got to the house today, I saw a little kid." This was after they had already replaced the windows, so nobody could have broken in. He said that he came into the house and he saw a kid go from one bedroom in the master to the other. And so he went into the master bedroom and nobody was there. At first he thought my mum had been there with my sister and I and had left somebody there or something, and when he realised that we were not there, he didn't really know what happened. And my mum just told him that it must have been the fumes and open a window up and wear a mask next time. Keep in mind too that my stepdad really isn't the type of person to believe in ghosts or paranormal things, and he doesn't get scared easily, so this was really out of character for him. Right after we moved in, though, almost instantly in fact, my sister had an imaginary friend, Whitehead, which was unusual because she was never a play-pretend type of kid. She never really played with dolls or anything for that fact. She was more of a computer game kid type of person. She was always very logical too and thought very scientifically, and even though very young at the time, it was just odd because she never had an imaginary friend before. My mum and I were always the more artistic and wacky ones, and my sister and her dad were the more logical ones. Just to give you some insight. Anyway, generally when a child invents an imaginary friend, it's because they want someone to play with, right? But her imaginary friend was super annoying and he was always bothering her. And she would constantly complain about Mikey not sharing a toy, or he won't play this game, or he touched my juice, he's not following rules and not taking turns. And I mean, who invents an imaginary friend so that they can fight with them all day? But one day though, my mum was out front just talking to my neighbour. She was telling my mum that before the people before us, there was another family with kids there. And then she asked if we ever saw anything weird in the house. She told my mum that the family before saw stuff in the house and that her son, who was now a teenager, when he was little, that he had an imaginary friend named Mikey. And the kids that lived in her house before us also played with Mikey and that she had seen him before. My sister and I would spend the weekends with our grandparents, and my mum would take the batteries out of all of our toys because they would just go off randomly when no one was in our rooms. In fact, I remember I had a piggy bank that made a noise when I put money in it, and one night it just wouldn't stop, so I checked to see if it was jammed, but nothing was up with it, so I ended up throwing it away because it just wouldn't stop going off in the middle of the night. Now, I had never had problems with sleeping before or after that house, but when we lived there, every morning I would wake up kind of contorted in some way. I would wake up shoved into a little space between my bed and the dresser in a ball, and I would always be stuck, and my mum would have to help me out in the morning. I would always try to figure out exactly how I got there, but I never really could. I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time, and my mum had to put up guards on the side of the bed to stop me from doing it. But, inevitably, I would still end up contorted and shoved between my dresser or something. This never happened when I would stay at my grandparents', though, which was really weird. My mum worked a night job and would stay home during the day with my sister as well. So one night, she came home from work and was washing her hands in the kitchen. From the kitchen you could see into the living room, and my mum turned around because she said that she could just feel someone watching her. And for a split second, there was a kid just standing there. She said that he looked about 8 years old, and then he was just gone. Not long after that, too, it was my sister's birthday. After the party, my sister and I went to my grandparents' house. My mum and stepdad were alone. My mum took all the balloons from the party and tied them together and put them in the corner in the living room. They were watching TV, and the air was off because the weather is nice around my sister's birthday, and the fan wasn't on. When all of a sudden, the strings came together like somebody grabbed it, and then they floated about a foot. Then they went around the corner and really slowly down the hallway. Then, once it got to the light in the hallway, the balloons went down and around the light. It went down to the end of the hallway and stopped at my sister's door. My mum and stepdad were watching in shock, not knowing what the hell to do. So my mum decided to talk to it, and she said, "Hey Mikey, if you want those balloons, you can have them." Right when she said that, the balloons went into my sister's room. Now, there used to be a Taco Bell by our house, and this was before they started remodeling them, so it looked like a mission. So, my mum and my sister and I were driving past the Taco Bell, and my sister said, "Mum, Mikey says that he used to live in a Taco Bell house." Well, we didn't think anything of it, but after we had lived there for a while, my mum decided to look into the history of the property. Before, it had been a cattle ranch, and she then learned that before that, right on the property where our house and 3 others were, she found out that there was a children's mission. It was run by the Catholic Church, and they had orphans, and that was when it all clicked. One year my sister said too that it's Mikey's birthday and we have to make a cake. So my mum made a cake, and then she marked it with a little dot on the calendar. Then when she changed over the calendar the next year, she marked it with a dot again, just to see what would happen. And the following year, on the same day, my sister says it's Mikey's birthday and he would like a cake. At Christmas time, my mum went out and bought him a Hot Wheel and a little toy horse. A couple of days later, the horse just disappeared. My sister didn't touch it, and I had no idea where it went. And then, a couple of years later, when we were playing in the backyard, we actually found it buried in the yard. We brought it back inside, and we put it on the coffee table, and that night, it went missing again, and after that, we still haven't seen it. So, I was a picky eater, and still am, but my stepdad used to make me stay at the table till I ate all of my food. I was also stubborn as a kid, so I would sit there until 10 at night sometimes when he would finally just let me go to bed. But every night at that table, I would see shadows walking around the hallway from room to room. I would just think that I was seeing things, but it was constantly, almost every night in fact. Anyway, that's pretty much everything that I remember from that place. My mum and my sister and I moved out after my mum and stepdad split up. I haven't been back there since then, and my sister's dad still lives there, and she goes there on the weekends and whatnot. She's in high school now, but she still tells me that the house feels very heavy, and she sees shadow people all the time, but that's about it. I thought that I would just share this experience because, I don't know, I just find it interesting myself. Sorry if I jump around a lot, I just wanted to try and get most of it out there. I was young too, and it's hard to remember everything in order because it was so long ago. I have a lot of pictures from the house with weird stuff in it though, and I'll ask my mum for them and hopefully I can post them here. Anyway, thanks for listening. This is my first time sharing this story, and hopefully it's not too hard to follow. This all happened about 8 years ago, and this is about my friend, A. I've known her since I was 15, and we were co-workers for about 5 years, and when I turned 18, we actually became roommates. Her boyfriend at the time also lived with us. So, A was just always kind of different. She was very religious and always talked about God and struggled with partying or smoking, without feeling guilty afterwards, that is. Or we would throw house parties. Nothing crazy, just a group of us playing beer pong, drinking, and maybe a little bit of weed. Nothing ever crazy happened, but literally, after every time, she would have to tell me that she can't do this anymore. She needs to focus on her relationship with God and whatnot. Yet, the parties were usually her idea, but I got so used to her being like that I just thought that that's her personality and I can deal with it. But about a year into us living together, her boyfriend decided to break up with her. And they'd been together since high school, and he's about 3 years older than her. So when this happened, I felt like this is where the chaos began. She starts to see a therapist and a psychologist because she went into a severe depression. I'm not sure why the doctor decided to put her on Adderall, but she tells me that she's being diagnosed with depression and ADD. I didn't really think much of it because I've known a few people in my life that take the same medication and it does seem to help them. But after a few months of her being on this medication, she drops a lot of weight and becomes way more spontaneous and did things that were just way out of character for her. She became very promiscuous too, and she would drive to San Diego, which is almost 3 hours away from where we live, to have one-night stands. It wasn't until another few months after that I noticed something was just really off with her. She started sleeping with one of our co-workers and got oddly jealous if anyone would just even talk to him. We all worked in the same department, so, we all kind of had to talk to each other. In fact, on one occasion, I asked if he would grab something from the back, and I turned around and she's just staring at me with this angry blank stare and says, "I know what you're doing." And I'm like, "What?" Because I literally had no idea what she was talking about. And she says, "I see the way you're looking at him. I know what you're trying to do." I say, "Are you being serious? Please tell me you're joking." And she says, "I see it. You can't lie to me. I know what you're trying to do. I won't let it happen." By this time, I was so pissed off that I just left work and I went home. Because she was 100% serious. It didn't freak me out so much as just kind of pissed me off. I've known this person for years. We lived and worked together. And how could she think that of me, let alone treat me like that? Anyway, after things got so bad with her, always accusing me of any little thing, like 1 minute she'd talk to me friendly, then the next she would accuse me of being in her room and going through her stuff. Eventually, I just moved out. And she went back to live with her grandpa. We still worked together, but I actually asked if I could do different shifts to her if possible. And then after that, I didn't see her for almost 6 months because she just didn't come back to work. But no one would tell me why or anything that happened, and it was almost a year when I got a Facebook message from her asking if she could see me and talk. So much time had passed that I wasn't angry. I was actually kind of worried. I wanted to talk to her to see if she was okay. By this time, I now live with my husband, so I tell her that she can come by my apartment. But when she showed up, I could hardly recognize her. She had gained a tremendous amount of weight. It looked like her hygiene had just gone out the window. Not to the point where she looked homeless or anything, but very much noticeable, especially from how she used to look. So I knew that she had gone through something. She didn't want to come in, so we went for a walk, and she begins to tell me what happened. She said that she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it was drug-induced by the Adderall. and I guess that it started when she went on a hike with her family. She said that her dad apparently turned into a demon and was going to kill her. She tried to run away, but her family had to restrain her and call the cops. They had held her for 72 hours, and she said that it was like God gave her the ability to see who was a good person or bad by seeing them as demons or as people. She told me that she takes medication for it now, and she's going to this Bible study group that has really helped her and whatnot. I told her that that was great, and I'm always here, and I can't imagine what she's gone through. So we start to hang out a few times after that. I go to her apartment. It was like assisted living for people with mental disorders, once or twice a week just to hang out and talk with her. I never really thought of her as dangerous because, well, she was on her meds, and from what I've read and heard of schizophrenics, they aren't usually violent. Plus, she seemed somewhat well. But after about a month of hanging out, she keeps trying to get me to go to this Bible study group. I tell her that I'm not really interested in all of that, but she eventually becomes ridiculously persistent about it. She even started stopping by my apartment randomly trying to get me to go. And this is the point where I slowly stopped coming by because it was like every time we hung out, she always brought it up and just wouldn't let it go. A week goes by and I didn't really talk to her or answer her calls, and if I did, I just came up with an excuse as to why I couldn't come by. A part of me felt bad, I'll admit, but it was like something was telling me to just distance myself a bit. And the following Friday, my mum calls me and asks if I've read the newspaper. And she tells me that A is actually in it. And after reading it, I was just in shock. The night before A's mum stopped by her apartment, I guess that she was very upset and disorientated. Her mum tried to calm her down, but couldn't, so she tried to call the police because she was getting more aggravated and aggressive. And A ends up chasing and stabbing her mum 7 times. I come to find out later from her family that she had stopped taking her medication because God told her that she didn't need them. She thought that her mum was trying to kill her and was a demon, and her mum actually survived and was able to make it to the neighbors. I guess the police found her wandering around her apartment complex with a knife still in her hand, and they said that she wouldn't talk to anyone, just had this look on her face like she wasn't there. She didn't struggle or say anything. To think, though, that if I hadn't have distanced myself like I did, that could have easily been me. And quite honestly, the thought of her being violent like that just never entered my mind. It was just a really terrifying and heartbreaking story. It's almost as if I had to grieve for her because who she used to be no longer existed, and knowing who she was, she just didn't deserve that kind of life. I'm sorry that this is a bit long and probably not that well expressed, but anyway, that's my story of my friend A, and I hope she's doing well. So I'm an Australian, but I have family that live in the States. 4 years ago, December of 2015, I was in Ohio for Christmas, staying with my sister. My sister, her husband, Jordan, and I were driving back to her house from a movie, and were pulling into a driveway when we heard a high-pitched screeching sound come from outside, away from our car. Assuming that it was just a bat or something, we all got out thinking nothing of it. But then we heard it again. It was around the time the sun was setting, but the noise was too low to the ground to be a bat. It sounded like it was coming from pretty close by, in fact. The noise wasn't unbearably loud or anything, but it was uncomfortably high-pitched, like higher than anything that I've ever heard. So by this point, we're all out of the car, and we hear it like one more time before Jordan goes over to the side of the house where he thinks the noise is coming from. He kicks some bricks around, picks up a couple of tiles, before we see it. Now, please understand, the following description may be slightly inaccurate as it has been 4 years since this time, but I swear that what I saw was actually there. I mean, both my sister and her husband saw the same thing too. It was vaguely humanoid. It was only about 2 or 3 feet tall, stark naked, bipedal, running away from Jordan towards us. Its head was massive compared to its body, and it was semi-translucent. You could see big veins all over it. It had beady black eyes, and I didn't get a chance to see if it had any genitalia, but from what I could notice, it didn't seem to. Upon approaching us, my sister screamed, and I instinctively jumped back, and it changed course and ran onto the road. It ran behind the house across the road, let out another screech, and that was the last that we saw of it. Jordan called the police, and we went inside. They didn't believe us, obviously, but all three of us remember the event quite vividly, and I'm wondering, has anybody from around Ohio seen anything like this? I've been working at a department store for the past 2 years. Although retail wasn't something I wanted to necessarily do, it was much better than my previous job in the food business, so I was grateful to not have to touch food all day, and would take the world of customer service much more gratefully than the food industry. It was in the middle of January, and the store is usually quite dead towards the end of the day. Usually, the following month after Christmas is never really busy, due to people probably not trying to spend money after the gift-giving season, and the cold weather of the winter season in Canada never really helped the situation much too. People are just not in the mood to leave the comfort of their own houses in the middle of a snowstorm, right? That meant too that they put less people on shift, and I was alone in the fitting room. I work at a pretty big store, and alongside the weather conditions, it meant that the employees were usually spread out on the floor, not within close proximity in comparison to what they put during the busy season. Also, none of us wore earpieces, as we did most of our paging through the speaker system. So, it was a Wednesday night, around 8, and the store closed at 9. I was usually put on the cash register, but often frequented the fitting room when they needed the help. It was a very quiet night, and I spent the first couple of hours of my shift just helping organise the beauty section that is right next to the fitting room, or going to speak to my lovely co-workers who worked in the jewellery section, helping the few customers that actually wanted to try clothes on when they came by. There was a man who came to the fitting room, though, with 2 dress shirts, and I didn't think much of it. I mean, after all, he was nothing that I haven't seen before. Older, tall, kind of stocky, muscular, pretty plain to be honest. I did notice, though, that he seemed to be dressed rather nicely. A clearly expensive suit and a nice shoulder bag accompanying him. I assume that he must have come into the store after his day off work. I counted the number of articles that he was bringing in, as that was mandatory in order for me to monitor the flow of clothes and try to stop theft. Handed him a number corresponding to the number of articles that he was taking in and asked him to politely put the clothes back on the hanger. In French, obviously, rather than English, because Quebec requires us to speak French first to customers. To which he replied with a simple, "No problem." I noticed then, too, that he had a thick accent, although I wasn't and am still not able to actually place my finger on it. I think it may have been Russian, but I can't say for sure. But the man walked into the fitting room, and I helped the other customers who came out of their rooms, counting the articles that they came out with and matched it with the numbers, and hung them back on their place on the rack. A few moments passed by, and the man came out. Not really putting much thought into it, I took both dress shirts from him. He didn't want any of them, and took back his number, said thank you, and turned to place the clothes on their rack. Usually, this was the point where the customer would just leave the fitting room, but when I turned around to go back to the front, he was still there. I asked him if there was anything that I could do for him, or if he still wanted the shirts that I had just put away. The man smiled, looked at me, not answering, and I felt a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. He was looking at me as if he wanted to say something, and me, being the 5'4" girl who hates confrontation of any kind, just kind of nervously laughed and started to organise the desk at the front of the fitting room entrance, awkwardly arranging all the numbers, although they were already in order. He asked for my name, to which I just looked down at the name tag I was wearing and I repeated it. He told me that it was a beautiful name. I laughed nervously at this, never knowing what to do in these sorts of situations, and being nice to him was a part of my job in customer service, so it's all that I could think of. Besides, he didn't do anything wrong, just complimented me. I said thank you, and I looked away to avoid eye contact. But then he just kind of stood there, for what felt like 20 minutes, but was probably closer to 3, I suppose. He stood there as I helped other customers, and it was beginning to make me feel very uncomfortable. But not wanting to be rude and also not wanting to subject myself to being uncomfortable for the rest of my shift, or however long he was planning to be there, I asked him if there was anything else that he needed help with. And here's where I began to get a bit scared. He then proceeded to tell me that he'll be waiting for me at 9:30 outside the doors of our store. He wanted to take me out. Confused, I just kind of looked at him oddly, because how did he know that that was when we finished? The store closed at 9, that's true, but we usually spend 30 minutes cleaning up the store. I suppose that information isn't hard to guess, but it still felt a bit weird. Plus, why did he want to take me out? I once again laughed nervously, because that seemed to be the only thing that I was able to do when uncomfortable, and politely declined, saying that I had to get home and study. But then he laughed and took a step closer towards me, and I instinctively took a step back. And he didn't seem to accept that answer, because he just smiled once more and said, "I'll be waiting for you outside the door where all the employees leave from, in the truck alley. I'll be there." There was a door that employees exited the mall from, because the normal doors usually locked around 9:15, and we always finish later than that, so we take the door that takes us into a side alley where all the trucks go to drop off shipments for our store and whatnot. But again, being someone who hates confrontation, and who doesn't do well with controlling my emotions, I felt myself start to tear up at this comment. No employee is allowed to mention the door that we leave from. It's a company rule. Since we usually finish late and the parking lot is dark, they don't want anyone to know where we exit from, as a precaution. I told him once more that, while I appreciated his offer, that I just wasn't interested and I had to continue my work. I politely told him to leave when he put a hand on my shoulder and I felt myself instantly freeze up. I remember thinking, praying in fact, that one of my co-workers would show up and pick up the rack, or the jewelry employee would stop filling the cases and just turn around. Obviously, with my luck, nobody did though. He told me that I was a pretty girl and that he couldn't wait for me in the alley at the end of my shift. He said that he has a nice apartment and had a cute dog, as if the dog was going to change my mind or something, and we could have a fun time. Desperate now, I said that I just had a boyfriend and he was going to be picking me up, hoping that that would deter him, but he just laughed. He said my name, and then told me that that wasn't something that usually stopped him, placing his hand on my shoulder. I honestly really began to feel scared at this point, and I just excused myself to use the phone on my desk, shaking his hand off of me that I hadn't realized was actually gripped on me pretty tightly. I paged the number for my coordinator, who curtly replied before I was even able to get a word in that she was busy with a customer and just hung up on me. So, unsure of what to do, as the man was still next to me as he followed me up to my desk, I called my manager, who thankfully replied. When he saw that I was speaking with someone on the phone, he left the fitting room, but it didn't make me feel any better. I told my manager what had happened, and with good reason, she freaked out, telling me that I need to report him immediately, reminding me that with people like that, I really have to be careful. She told me to call security, which I did, and the security guard told me that he had an eye on him through the camera. So it was around 8:30 at this point, and I was getting ready to start my closing tasks, still paranoid about what the man had said. To be fair, I'm a bit of a paranoid person at best, and I watch way too many murder documentaries, so I may have been overthinking. But it did sound like the beginning of an abduction movie, honestly. I kind of calmed down after a bit, not seeing the man anymore, and when the security guard called me back, he wanted to let me know that the man had never left. In fact, the guy was now circling the store. I felt more dread than before pop up in my stomach because, he didn't leave. Thankfully, he hadn't come back to see me. I felt kind of better for the fact that the security guard had seen him, so if anything did happen, there was someone who was able to identify him. Once again, overthinking, I suppose, but by the time the store closed and it was time to leave, two of my co-workers, Evan and Ethan, two boys who worked in the warehouse, made sure to walk me all the way to my car, not letting me be alone. And boy, did I appreciate that. Although I didn't want to admit it, I was scared walking through that alleyway, and I was even more paranoid that he was going to follow me home. I took the extra long route to see if anyone was trailing me, to which he wasn't. And when I walked through the safety door of my house and locked it behind me, I let go of a breath that I wasn't even aware I was holding in. I make sure now to always leave the store using the buddy system. I never walk alone, and I always make sure that I'm hyper aware of my surroundings. I also never wear my name tag anymore, and luckily, nothing happened to me, and maybe I was just overthinking the entire experience, I'll admit. But I want to stress that even if your job is in customer service, if someone makes you uncomfortable, it's good to speak up. You shouldn't have to be subjected to this behavior at your work, or anywhere for that matter. So this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was travelling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house the night that I arrived at my hometown, so I phoned a friend of mine from high school and asked if I could stay at his place. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I've stayed at his place before, so I knew that there would be a place for me to stay if they would allow it. My friend, Z, seemed like a pretty normal dude. We weren't best friends or anything, but we were pretty close by the time that we graduated. I mean, we would occasionally text or hang out if I was in town and catch up, reminisce on the times that we spent in orchestra or in English class, and when I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Now, Z's normally a pretty upbeat guy, but this time, it seemed like he was getting a brand new car or something, and I didn't think about it at the time, but he said that I could sleep in the guest room, so I just headed over. And when I got to his house, he was just as excited as he was on the phone. He was bringing up stuff to do, like getting high and watching weird movies or playing video games. Z's parents weren't home, so he really wanted the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired though from the drive, but since we rarely see each other, I thought a little bit of bonding couldn't hurt. We played some Smash Bros, smoked, and just chatted for a few hours. It was longer than I wanted, I'll admit, but I was having fun, so whatever, right? By the time that it was getting late, around 2 a.m., he started asking some pretty weird questions though. Like, if I ever wondered what it was like to kill someone, or if I thought anyone would miss me if I was gone. This, along with some pretty normal questions, like if I had a boyfriend, or how my parents are doing, or if I'm making any friends at school, gave me a weird feeling. I was confused in the moment, but it didn't really hit me until after that Z could have been assessing me for something bad. But the weirdness of it all just kind of made me want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room were. We say goodnight and I go to my room and we get ready for bed. I'm having some trouble sleeping, just insomnia that I've had for a while, so I stay awake for around an hour until I hear some movement outside of my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear footsteps walking past my door and up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after that. And what struck me as odd was that I didn't hear the basement door open, which creaks when it does. The light didn't turn on, so I was confused what Z was doing. But I heard him go back to his room, and it was a bit odd, I'll admit, and I had a bit of an odd feeling, but it was nothing beyond that. But it was playing in the back of my head that ever since I had met him this night, he just seemed a lot different than he's ever been. I decided to look him up on social media and Google to see anything out of ordinary, and everything seemed normal. Until I found his Tumblr, which was linked from an inactive Twitter account that I found on my Twitter contact list. And his Tumblr was, well, disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious-looking websites that I didn't dare click on, text posts and stories about murdering, cannibalism, necrophilia, and torture. There were photos of guns and knives and axes, which, after looking closely, looked like they were actually taken in his bedroom. The last post, around a week prior, was a text post from the account saying that he wished he could find someone easy to kill, like a homeless person. And upon seeing this, I was immediately filled with dread. I knew that he was going to do something. He must have gone up the stairs to lock the door. So I packed my things quietly. Luckily, I packed lightly as well. I opened the small window at the top of my bedroom wall. I started desperately climbing through, and as I was pulling my legs through, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlight illuminated enough for me to see that he was carrying something long and shiny, so I can only guess that it was a knife. He didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and I drove as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere upon getting to my dad's place, and reported his Tumblr account, and not before telling the police. They said that they couldn't really do anything, unfortunately, as the guns were registered under his dad, and plus he hasn't actually done anything yet. Nevertheless, I told my other high school friends not to hang out with Z, and ever since then, I've been pretty creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just the realization that someone that I knew so well could underneath be this person who could hurt me so bad like that, who could potentially kill me. I don't know what you're doing now, Z, but I'm sure that I don't want to know, and I hope that you're getting help. So this just happened tonight, and is obviously really fresh, and I'm freaked out and honestly just quite pissed off. I, a 23 female, met Jason, 29 male, from an app online last September. We clicked immediately, and from then on, went out together about once a week, sometimes twice. We've spent the past year going on dates, out to nice restaurants, garden walks, spending the night, etc., and we established that we had feelings for each other about 2 months into everything, though we had our rocky moments for sure, and I didn't fully trust him. At one point, I wanted to date, but he claimed he was too busy with work, which subsequently caused us to separate for a while. Once we eventually came back together, I told him that I didn't want to be exclusive, but we could still hang out as I enjoyed his company. Now, there has always been some sneaking suspicions on my behalf that there was another partner in his life, because he always paid in cash wherever he went and was very secretive about his private life. I had voiced these thoughts to him, but honestly didn't care too much, because after he told me that he wasn't interested in dating me, I also started seeing another partner and was using protection with both of them. Meanwhile, he didn't want to date me, but raged whenever he thought that there was another man around my life. And he has exhibited some concerning and possessive behaviors, but I let them slide for the most part because I was still doing whatever I wanted. Fast forward to tonight, November 19th of 2019, 14 months after we met. We went to a really nice restaurant downtown after work, and I asked if he wanted to take the subway back to my place since we had a few drinks. We stopped by his car to grab his bag, and off we went to the station. When we got to the station, he said that he forgot his card in his car, and I figured it was no biggie, and I swiped for him. I said that he didn't need to pay me back because it was like $2, but he insisted that he would. When we got back to my apartment, I told him that he was welcome to take a shower, and he went to the bathroom. I was messing on my phone and saw CS had sent me $2 for the train. This was weird to me because his initials are JN, so I clicked on the Venmo friends list, and he only had around 20 Venmo friends, so I picked a random person and looked them up on Facebook. I went down their friends list, and look at that, a picture of Jason and his brother. The only issue is that the name was Chase Smith. The photo did look a little different because he was about 50 or 60 pounds heavier in the photograph and is currently very fit, but I was 90% sure that it was him. And just to confirm, I googled his name and the area around which he lives, and I got a hit on the white pages. It said that he was related to so-and-so and such, and I remember him telling me that his siblings' names were these. So it turned out that I don't even know the name of the guy that I've been bonking for a year. He got out of the shower, though, and sat on my bed. I was quiet and looked at his face, asking, "Is your real name Chase Smith?" This guy looked me dead in the eye and said, "No." And I can tell you right now that I lost it. Like, I made the leave Britney alone guy look cool and calm and collected, comparatively. I started crying and telling him to get the hell out of my house. He approached me, and I told him not to touch me, but he grabbed my wrists and insisted that we talk about it. I told him again to get the hell out of my house and never contact me again. He refused to leave for a while, but eventually did. Afterward, I looked a little deeper and found out that he has criminal records, though I can't see what they were for. But from his past behavior, I'm honestly a little worried for my safety because I immediately blocked him on everything, and I know for a fact that he's going to go apeshit when he realizes that he can't contact me. But everything up to this point has been a lie. Just when you think you know someone, and it turns out that they're probably crazy. So I was in Colorado Springs, CO, with my boyfriend. We were staying with a friend and his girlfriend, Greg and Liz. They lived in an older apartment building, and our friend slept in their bedroom, and we slept in their office. In the office, too, there's a closet where Greg practices witchery and magic and stuff. I have absolutely no idea what exactly that entails, but he's very into all those dark things and otherworldly stuff. I'm a little wooey myself, and nothing he said about it made me uncomfortable. And there wasn't any sort of weird energy in the office, so we blew up a mattress and we laid down for our sleep in Colorado. And as I was falling asleep, it felt like my boyfriend had literally pulled my leg. I'm not sure if this is particularly relevant, but the bottom of the air mattress was right at the sliding doors of the closet. I can only compare this feeling to when you're asleep and you suddenly jolt awake, as if you miss a step and are about to fall. However, I didn't feel like I was falling, only that my leg was being pulled. After realizing my boyfriend was already asleep, I quickly dismissed this as just one of those instances and I fell back asleep. Then, as I'm almost completely back asleep, I have the unmistakable sensation of having tape ripped off of my mouth. I quietly vocalize, "Quit messing with me," and then turned to cuddle my boyfriend and just went back to sleep. I was a little shaken up, I admit, but not so much that it kept me awake. The next day, I mentioned it to Greg and Liz, and they seemed surprised. He basically said, "There's nothing unfriendly here," and we just dismissed the topic after that. It's been on my mind now and again, though, and I don't know. I just wanted to share it with someone. So, I apologize in advance for any inconsistencies. I remember the main points, but the details are a bit fuzzy. So when I was 5, my family moved into an apartment with 3 bedrooms, which was pretty exciting for me, because this meant that my 3-year-old sister and I no longer had to share a room. Our parents separated our bunk beds, so we each had a somewhat taller than standard twin bed. One Saturday, I was awake before the arse crack of dawn, as most small kids tend to do on the weekends, and was playing in my room just waiting on everyone else to wake up. And then, just suddenly, there was a really pretty woman with long black hair in my room. I had no fear, no concern, no shock, just felt like it was completely okay and normal for her to be there. I don't remember much specific, but that she was really pretty made me calm and had very long dark hair as well. She told me to go and tell my mum that there's something wrong with her baby, so I did. And when my mum recounts this story, she says that that was the thing that got her attention the most. I always called my sister Sissy, so she thought that it was odd that I would say, "There's something wrong with your baby," rather than something more appropriate for 5-year-old me, that is. And it caught her attention enough to get out of her bed and go and check on my 3-year-old sister. Being small kids who were prone to nighttime accidents, we both had the original factory plastic on our mattresses with a waterproof cover on it, and finally the sheet. And in her sleep, my sister had somehow managed to wrap her neck in not only the sheet, but also the cover and the plastic, and was semi-conscious and kind of purplish blue when we found her. She had also managed to scoot herself between the mattress and the headboard, so was wedged half upside down between the bed and the wall, head down. My mum yelled and my dad came in and ended up breaking the headboard to extract my sister, who was thankfully fine. At some point too, I don't remember when, but I told my mum about the lady and how she told me that something was wrong with your baby. I hadn't even actually set foot into my sister's room to see for myself, just went and got my mum after I'd been told to do so. Additionally, a few months or a year or so later, I think, while visiting my grandparents, I ended up finding a picture of the lady with the long dark hair, and it turns out that she was my grandpa's mum, who was mostly Cherokee and had died young from pneumonia. So about a year ago, I had been walking home from work when I saw a yard sale, a half block from my house or so, and I stopped in to check things out and laid my eyes on a painting. The painting was of 4 teddy bears sitting on a red chair in front of a fireplace. The room in the painting was very well lit, except for the top left corner of the room where a shelf was holding a very creepy looking porcelain doll and another teddy. The darkened corner of the painting was what drew my attention the most. When you would look at it, it would just kind of give you a bit of a sense of dread and anxiety. But the weirdest part of the whole painting was that I felt that I had to bring it home with me, so much so that I felt like I would regret it if I didn't. So, needless to say, I bought it. I brought the painting home and I showed it to my wife. She liked it a lot too, so we decided to hang it above our bed. But within a couple of days of having this painting, the atmosphere of our room had really started to change. It went from a very comfortable home-like vibe to a very sad and angry atmosphere to it. We had also noticed that whenever we'd have a nap or go to bed or something, we would have some of the most terrifying dreams that anyone could think of. Dreams just made of pure evil, to say the least. And then it got really bad after about a week and a half of having it. So, my wife was in the living room and I was in the kitchen cooking some dinner when we hear a loud thud. I look into the living room to see our copy of H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon had flown about 4 feet from the bookshelf that it was on. My wife actually saw it fling itself off the shelf, so us having had many experiences with the paranormal before, we weren't too bothered, especially because we already knew that our house was haunted, so we just thought it was this kid playing a joke or something. Fast forward 2 days after the bookshelf incident had occurred, and now I'm home alone. My wife was out of town at her parents', and I was getting ready for work, when I hear a loud thud coming from the living room again. I go downstairs in a bit of a rush, I'm running late for work, and see that not only has the same book been flung off the damn shelf again, but so has the Book of Osiris, Egyptian Lord of the Underworld, also. As I said, I was running a little late for work, so I didn't bother picking them up. I just left them on the ground where they were, and when I got home from work about 6 hours later, I noticed that the books are back on the shelf where they were flung from like nothing had happened. And I can assure you that nobody was home to put them back there. But things would get worse. Another couple of days down the road, and my wife's back from her parents'. It's late and she's asleep. I'm not yet. I'm playing PS4 in the living room when my wife comes downstairs just in hysterics. I ask her what's the matter and why she's so scared, and she proceeds to tell me that she was half woken up by me crawling into the bed, picking her up a little, and moving her over a bit, and hearing who she thought was me in her sleepiness whisper, "Move over," in her ear. In her half-sleep state, she rolled over to give me a kiss and saw that there was no one in the room with her. So, who actually moved her and spoke to her like that? That made her panic and run down to me to explain what had happened. After I had calmed her down, I went to go and get the painting, as I had finally put 2 and 2 together that this messed up stuff was only happening since the painting came into our home. And when I got up to the room, it was no longer on the wall, and it was now on the floor, far away from where it was hung. And the strange thing, though, was that there was no crash or bang from it falling, which meant that something had to have picked it up and moved it carefully. And it definitely wasn't my wife, as she had bolted out of the room to get me. Well, we did an almost 3-hour-long smudging of the house and painting, and then we buried the painting in the potato field behind our house. After we did the smudging and the burying of the painting, everything just went back to normal. We have since moved from that house, but I'll never forget what went down. So I was about 17 years old and I was dog sitting for a family friend across town. I had my driver's license at this point and had driven to the home where the dog lived to take her for a walk and put her in a crate at home. I had worked that afternoon. At the time, it was about 3 p.m., I think, at my retail job, and wanted to make sure that the dog was taken care of and safe while I was gone for a few hours. So I walked her around and brought her home, locking up behind me. I got in my minivan and I headed down the road. I hadn't gotten far when I came upon a stop sign. I slowed to a halt and I noticed a man waiting on the crosswalk. He was probably in his late 40s or maybe early 50s, had a hood on and a full jacket, odd because it was summer, and had a scraggly beard. I made sure to have my vehicle at a full stop before waving him on, gesturing him that I saw him and was going to wait for him to cross before making my left turn that I was signalling for. He nodded at me and began to walk across the street. Mind you, my car was at a full stop, and my foot was on the brake the whole time. And when the man was about halfway across the walkway, he stopped and jumped back, as if my car had started moving. I knew that it hadn't, and was immediately confused. Maybe there was something on the road? I didn't know. What I did know, though, was that I hadn't budged from my stopped position. I looked at him, and he continued to look at me, and began screaming and swearing. My windows were up, so I couldn't make out much, but from what I could hear and what I could read on his lips, a lot of swearing was coming from him, and he looked really angry. The only explanation that I could think of was that I had somehow bumped him with my car, but I knew that I hadn't. So I stayed where I was, and I again waved him on, trying to show that he needed to move and that I was going to wait for him. He took a few more steps before throwing himself back again, grabbing his leg and hobbling around as though it was broken. And at this point, I felt a strange feeling in my stomach. I didn't know what was wrong with this man, but I knew that something wasn't right. I mean, there was no way that I had done anything, and he was walking just fine until he was in front of my car and I couldn't see his legs. But what he did next is what makes this so scary. The man started to come at my passenger door, arms waving while jumping on one foot, not resting his other leg on the ground at all. I looked away from him, staring straight ahead and making sure my doors were locked. He stopped before reaching my door and began gesturing for me to come out. At this point, because I was so close, I could hear him, and he was saying, "My leg, please help me. I think you hit me." My blood ran cold, and I refused to acknowledge him. I made sure that he was far enough away, and I slowly stepped on the gas, taking the left turn. I dialed my mum and told her about what happened, and how the whole thing was just so incredibly strange. And she immediately confirmed what I had feared was the truth. The man was probably trying to lure me out of my car. He definitely was not injured, and even if he was, I definitely wasn't responsible. He had seen that I was a small 17-year-old girl, and probably wanted to take advantage of someone young who might not know better. Immediately, we decided that I should file a police report. I called my local station, and they wanted me to come in person and describe the incident. I gave a detailed report, and they said that they would keep an eye out. Nothing ever did come of it, but sometimes I still wonder if he ever did attempt that stunt with anybody else. Was it premeditated, or was it simply an opportunity that he saw? Either way, I sincerely hope that I never see this guy again. So previously, I shared a story about my creepy encounter as a pizza deliverer driver to the basement of some place, and I was a pizza driver for about 4 years, so needless to say, I've come across plenty of strange customers. Also, I'm a small female, so I don't come across very intimidating for sure. But I wanted to share one more story because this encounter would be the reason why I quit my job as a pizza deliverer for good. So again, my shift was always from 6 p.m. to midnight because I had a day job. Late one night, I had a delivery to the same bad part of town. Usually I'm a lot more alert of my surroundings, but that night I wasn't because I was tired. It was pretty late and the streets were pretty quiet. I knew exactly where I was delivering to, though, because he was a regular customer. So I'm driving on my way there, and I stop at a red light in the middle of a hill. As I'm waiting impatiently for it to turn green, I see a person walking about a block away in the direction of my car. It was dark, so it was hard to get a good description of what he looked like. I could just see his movements, but he stopped walking, lifted something up, and in very slow motion, I hear a really loud bang, and my window on my driver's side completely shatters just all over me. I then see him run towards me really quickly. I stepped on my gas and I sped off, and I drove past my customer's house and stopped about a mile away. And it was at that moment that I called my boss and I told him that I quit. I drove home shaking, but thankful to be alive. My family is my witness to this because they took pictures of all the broken glass and helped me clean it out of my car the next day. But that was the closest that I've been to dying. So I rent this house, but it's been in the family of my landlord, Nancy, since it was built in 1929. She lives on 1.5 acres behind me in her own home, and she also owns the house next to mine on the corner. Her house was built on family land in the 1980s, and there's approximately 35 acres of bean farm that is also a part of this large plot that I live in. So, the home that I live in is in the original farmhouse for the Miller family here in northwestern Ohio. Now, we, my husband, our 2 kids, our dog and I, moved in here on the 1st of April of this year. It's a quaint little farmhouse with 2 bedrooms, original shiplap along the mudroom walk, and original millwork along the window casing the floorboards. The newest part of the home is the garage, which is completely made of cinder block and no frills. I absolutely love old homes with the original details, and we've been fixing it up a bit as Nancy, our landlord, is suffering from some sort of a cancer, and I want to make sure that she's looking after herself and not worrying about us or some peeling latex paint on the doors or whatnot. So, everything was normal about this place, aside from well water issues that were quickly fixed with the installation of a water softener, but we really enjoyed being here. Like I said, it's a quaint little house just big enough for us, and I love living here. Until one morning, while I was getting ready for school. So, I'm going back to school for a degree in physical therapy, after not being able to find a job in my original major, early childhood education. I get up every morning at the same time, 6 o'clock, and this particular morning, my husband, who's a police officer, had the day off, so he was going to let our kids sleep in with him instead of making me haul them off in the dark to the sitter's house. I was getting dressed in our living room as to not wake my husband or my son, who likes to co-sleep, with the lights on in our room, when I saw it. The door to my child's room was open, and someone was standing there, staring at me, half hiding behind the doorframe. That someone was about a head taller than either of my children, with a full head of dirty blonde curls, and in a second it slowly pulled its head back and just vanished. Now, my daughter's bed is up against the wall, and the foot of her bed is right at the doorframe to accommodate both twin-size beds, and their dressers in the same room as well. So, there's just no way that anyone could stand at the end of her bed and hide behind the doorframe at the same time. I raced into her room, though, and not only was my daughter asleep at the top of her bed, but she was holding a giant cow stuffed animal, and they were both tucked in. I woke my husband up, and he saw that I was visibly shaken. He said my pupils were huge, and I was shaking, and after explaining what I saw, he went in to check for himself, and when he came back, I wasn't in any shape better. He asked me if he should treat me for shock, and I said no, but I know what I saw. This all happened about 2 months ago, though, and the reason that I'm sharing this now is because, well, another incident happened tonight to my husband. So he was brushing my daughter's hair after her bath, and he said that a black shadow crossed the threshold in my children's bedroom, and he yelled for me. The goosebumps were just all over his arms and legs, and my daughter was asking, "Who's in there, Dad?" She's 3 years old. Then, as we're putting them to sleep, The little Tykes toy circus goes off on top of their toy box several times. My husband calls me from the bathroom to come and see what's happening, and it goes off one last time while I'm approaching it. None of their toys have ever gone off by themselves since moving here, especially not this one. It's a tiny circus that only makes music when the little acrobat is on the tightrope and you lift one side to make him slide across. We do plan on installing cameras to their room and the toy area to keep monitoring this situation this weekend. And if possible, I'll make sure I send you guys the findings. But the 1929 farmhouse seems to have come with a lot more than what was listed in the rental agreement. So my dad was a pastor at a church for 4 years. Many people died in this church before we got there, and over the course of these 4 years, some of the craziest, just most unexplainable stuff happened. And I'm here to tell all of you the best ones. So, my parents went to Maine every year. I gotten tired of the trip and decided to stay home this year. I went over to the church to grab some snacks from the back of the old sanctuary. There were 2 sanctuaries. One was about 90 years old, and the newer one was about 50 years old. So I went to the back of it where the snack booth was. Mind you, this is in the middle of the day, so it was completely lit up through the old stained glass windows. I bent down to grab some drinks from the mini fridge under the counter, and when I got back up and turned to walk out the door, I saw this figure standing in the doorway. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, no ears, just a bald head wearing a long dark robe. As soon as I saw it, it vanished just like that, but safe to say that I ran out of there as fast as I could. Another time, my cousin came over to spend the night at my house. We wanted to play PS4, but the other controller was over in the church. So we walked across the yard into the church. It was pitch black out. When we opened the door of the church, we might have made it 2 or 3 feet in, I think, before we heard the loudest, blood-curdling scream that I've ever heard from the back of the new sanctuary. We ran out of that door and back into my house so quickly that I don't even know if I touched the ground. My cousin was on the verge of crying and saying that he was never going back in that church again. The church also had this preschool in it too. They would change out the toys in the classes every now and then so that the kids wouldn't get bored of the old ones. And one time the teacher took one of the kids upstairs to help her pick some toys out for the rest of the class. These old classes upstairs were used for storage of preschool toys, extra chairs, old desks at the time, so there was no one else up there except for them. When the teacher was grabbing some of the toys, the kid that she brought up to help said, "Hey, look at those kids playing with those toys over there." When the teacher looked over there was nobody there. These are just a couple of the stories, and I could sit here all day and write the hundreds of experiences that I've had in this church, but I don't really have the time for that. But if you guys want to hear some more stories, please let me know in the comment section below, and I'll share a few more. So this took place when I, 25 female, was about 11 or 12. I was walking home from school one afternoon, which didn't take very long as I lived in the same neighborhood. I was on the same road as my house when a car pulled over to me and the guy driving complimented me on my shoes. He seemed to be in his 20s or 30s and had a really friendly atmosphere around him that I didn't initially question. My shoes weren't anything special, just black skater-type shoes with 3 pink stripes on either side. He said that his daughter would love those shoes and he wanted to buy her the same kind. He inquired if he could ask me some questions about them, and I got a weird vibe immediately, but being so close to my house and being unbelievably naive, I agreed to answer his questions. He pulled over and parked up just in front of me and opened his driver's side door. He beckoned me over and started asking typical questions such as where I got them, how much, were they good quality, stuff like that. I didn't know the brand of the shoes, so I slipped it off to check the label, while balancing on one foot. He said that he wanted a closer look, so he kept trying to get me to go closer, and he asked to see my shoe. And being so young and stupid again, I agreed. Luckily, I didn't go closer to the car, but instead I just kind of tossed him the shoe. He kept suggesting that I should rest my socked foot on his car, as he was concerned if my balance faltered that my sock would get dirty. This had gotten too weird for me, though, and I began to ask for my shoe back, suggesting that my mother was waiting for me. But then he proceeded to bring my shoe up to his face and inhaled deeply. He turned to me with a huge smile, complimenting me on how wonderful my shoe smelled, how soft and sweet my feet must be, and similar comments. It was at this point that I was truly done with this interaction, shoe back or not. So I demanded for my shoe back, as I didn't want to explain to my mother why I came home with only one shoe. He eventually handed it back to me, after first trying to Cinderella it on my foot, me obviously declining, and then just drove off. I was so embarrassed at my stupidity and naivety that I didn't tell that story until years later, and I hope no other kids were as idiotic as I was that day. Since my wife and I moved into this house about 10 years ago now, I think, I've had a number of small experiences, but it's all recently changed. For years, something has been untying all of my shoes every second or third day. Once or twice my laces have been removed, but it's a tiny thing and a small annoyance. I know my wife isn't doing it because it's happened more often when she's been away for work trips and such. I used to say out loud, "Oh no, my shoes. Good job, Ghost. This is a real problem for me," as a way to play it off as a bit of a joke and to maybe have whatever was doing it maybe think that this was enough to really get under my skin. Then, about a year ago, while I was alone in my house, except for my enormous dog who was sleeping downstairs, something very clearly whispered my name into my ear from very close by. It sounded like it was inches from my left side. Right after, my dog jumped up, ran up the stairs to the room that I was in, and started barking at something too. Then, about 3 months ago, whatever it was just stopped messing with my shoes. Okay, fine, whatever, right? But then my wedding ring went missing. And I definitely put it down on my side table to do the dishes, went back, and it was gone. So I spent days looking for it. 3 days later, I was laying on the couch watching a movie on my day off while my wife was at work, and something came flying up the basement stairs, hit a wall and bounced into the dining room, and came to a rest under the table. It hit the wall at an upward angle and hit it really hard. I went up and checked it out, and yep, it was my wedding ring. And then I heard something in the basement. There couldn't have been anyone down there. My wife was at work. There's no basement windows to come through. We had an alarm system installed when we moved in, and my large dog is very protective. Great Pyrenees are like that. That was when I decided that my dog needed a walk, and we noped out over to a friend's house for the day. It's been very quiet here since, almost too quiet, and I'm just kind of waiting for something else to happen. A few years ago, my husband and I, and our 2 children, moved to a country town in good old PA. My husband works for the Amish, so we found a nice little place that has a huge yard with 36 pear trees. No neighbours except for the Amish about a quarter mile away as well. We rented from an Amish man who didn't tell us very much about the place, and we didn't really ask because our rent is cheap and he isn't very social. He was really nice when we first toured the place, and mentioned briefly how the living room is a new addition, which was noticeably newer with good energy. The other half of our house was 3 bedrooms upstairs. My daughter's room is more like a loft with no door and is to the left of the stairs when you walk up. We converted a large walk-in closet into my son's bedroom. My husband and I share the room across from my son and directly to the right of the stairs when you walk up. All the rooms are very close, as it's a small house, and I plugged a motion detector nightlight at the bottom of the stairs with only one intention, to see before walking up at night. And boy, did it ever work, and not only for us living there. So I would say that we noticed the lights sporadically coming on about 3 days into living there, pretty much every night as well. I could see it shining up the stairs and onto the wall above them. My husband and I immediately felt a little scared, to the point where I would make him check the kids, the dog, the house, and the locks. I, of course, tested out the motion light, and it worked properly, so I couldn't explain it. One night, though, we had to sleep without a fan, and it was really, really quiet when the light came on, and we heard creeping up the stairs, the whole way up and into my daughter's room. I was scared, but I jumped up and ran into her room, and when I did, nobody was there. She was tossing and turning, but she was asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I noticed the mirror above the stairs was gone. When my daughter got home from school, she told me that she put it in her closet, and when I asked why she did that, she said, "Because when I woke up, I thought that I saw your face in the mirror, but it looked angry. It freaked me out, and so I took it down." I didn't argue with her about that one, and I know what I heard the night before, let alone the motion light. So I said a prayer, but the light came on every night for a few weeks, with the same creaking. And then I could hear my daughter's bed creak as if someone was sitting on it, and I would run in to see her toss and turn, and it broke my heart and really freaked me out, but my daughter said that she felt fine. A friend of mine blessed my house while smudging it after a few weeks of this, and then it just literally stopped. I still think about it though, and how it just instantly stopped after she came. Life is just really weird, isn't it? So let me start by saying that this story is 100% true. Every time that I tell it, or think about it even, I get goosebumps. I'll spare you some time though, and avoid the lengthy post of details, and I'll try and hit the key points. So a few years back, my son and I visited a historic landmark near our home. I personally have had experiences with ghosts in the past, and it was Nemancolin Castle in Brownsville, PA, to be exact. So I personally have had experiences with ghosts in the past, and I wasn't opposed to having an experience at the castle. It was well known that it was quite active, in fact. It was featured on My Ghost Story, if you're familiar with the show. For the intro, the tour guide told us about the history of the castle, the families that had lived there, the tragedies as well, and I'll admit that I forgot some of the other details, but I remember her encouraging photos from people on that tour. She mentioned the possibility of capturing ghosts and mentioned the shadow man that is often photographed. Moving along, though, we went through the castle from top level to bottom. There were a few rooms that I had feelings in, but no sightings or anything. But I think that they're worth mentioning because it adds some context. So room 1, we were taken into a nursery. It was furnished as it would have been way back when it was occupied by the original owners. The story was that a child that had lived in that home had passed away suddenly, and her playful spirit remained. I believed it to be true because prior to the story, I swore that I heard a child laughing as we made our way down the hall. Room 2. This room had large windows and a small bed off to the side. And the moment that I walked into the room, I imagined a woman laying in the bed, older, and slowly fading away. Her deathbed, if you will. The tour guide proceeds to tell us a story about a woman who lived in that room. I had to ask, "Ma'am, what's her story?" And she replied, "Well, she passed away in this room. She actually died in that spot right there in that bed." And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, I'm in tune here, and I'm expecting something to happen. There were many other rooms, but besides being a bit creepy, I don't really have much to say on them, so I'll skip all of those details. But we took several pictures, as everyone does when you visit a haunted house, hospital, or whatever. We even had the tour guide take a photo of the two of us. I didn't review any of the photos until going home, as I was mostly concerned with enjoying the tour. When we left, though, we discussed our time in the car and we exchanged our eerie feelings, confirming that this place was indeed haunted and wishing that we had seen something maybe. That night, my son went to sleep and my wife and I were laying in bed just watching some TV. We were discussing the tour and I suddenly heard a man's voice outside of our bedroom window. The window was closed and it was winter time, but the voice was so loud from screaming that I could hear, "You shouldn't be here. Are you out of your mind?" I then heard another man yell, "There's nothing you can do." I actually became irritated, and I opened the door to the balcony to go out and tell these men to stop arguing in the middle of the night by my home. And I'm telling you guys, when I opened that door to find complete silence out there and nobody standing around, all of the hair on my body stood straight up. I knew something was going on right there and then, because there was just no way that these men just ran off or anything. I would have seen them for sure. The street was long enough both ways, and my home stood alone. And I mean, I heard arguing, and literally 2 seconds later, just complete silence and nothing. It didn't make any sense. My wife was pretty spooked, but I told her no worries, they must have left. And after that, we just decided to get some sleep. In the middle of the night, though, I had an experience that was honestly just insane. I was having a nightmare that a man was attacking my wife, and she was so upset and frantic and calling for my help, and I was fighting this guy off. Now, sure, we all have nightmares, but here's the kicker. I woke up, but I couldn't move, and I was experiencing sleep paralysis. And all I could hear was my wife next to me crying and trying to speak, but her voice sounded muffled. So I'm fighting this weight on me so I can help her. I finally can move, and I kiss her on her forehead and tell her that it's okay, I'm here. I look over at the clock, and it's 3 a.m., and without missing a beat, she says, "I was having a nightmare. This man was attacking me, and you fought him off, but when I woke up, my body was stuck, and I couldn't move. I could look around the room, but I couldn't speak. I kept yelling for you, but nothing would come out." And that right there freaked me out so bad, because we had both had the same nightmare and experienced the same sleep paralysis at the exact same time. And it was then that I knew that it was something from this place that we had just visited. Something had followed me home. I finally got out of bed after talking to my wife, who had no intention of going back to sleep after that. I offered to go and get us both some water. I returned to the bed, and we continued talking until somehow we both drifted back off to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, we were just silent, still kind of freaked out, wondering if this was going to be an ongoing thing. My son comes down to join us, and he says, "Mum, when did you leave my room last night?" My wife looks at him, strange, and says, "What? I wasn't in your room last night." And he kind of laughs and says, "Yeah, okay, Mum, you definitely were, because I remember waking up to you laying down in my bed, rubbing my hair and kissing my forehead. It was at 3 a.m. I felt your hair when I rolled over, and then I just went back to sleep." And when he told us that, I just about lost my mind. I mean, you're telling me the same exact time that we were being haunted, something appeared to our son in the form of my wife? Like, listen, I don't understand it all, but that would freak anyone out, right? What's even crazier, though, is that later that day, I looked through the photos that I took, and there was a picture of me and my son, with a shadow man super tall in between us. So at this point, I'm like, man, I gotta make this thing just go away. My wife kept complaining about weird stuff happening in the house. Our house was unusually dark inside too, which was weird. Even with the blinds open, it seemed just like light wouldn't shine in like it used to. It got so bad, in fact, that one day I just got fed up and I was home alone, and I remember yelling like a crazy person saying, "You're not welcome here." I just had enough at this point, and shortly after, this huge weight just felt like it was lifted off my shoulders, and at the home too. Light was shining in as it had prior, and it was just crazy to me. Anyway, there you have it. The craziest experience I ever had, and I'll never forget it. I still want to know who it was and why it happened in the first place, because none of it makes much sense at all. So, I'm just really interested to know what everyone thinks about this, as I have no idea what to think about it, and any opinions on it would be fantastic. So, to start off, a few years ago, I had this terrifying experience that I wish nobody to go through. And what happened was that I'd been sleeping peacefully one night. Everything was normal, but I had suddenly got the worst feeling just come over me, which caused me to wake up. Like, it felt as though I was being closely watched. But at the time, I didn't think much of it, and just kind of casually woke up, and it's when I realized what was making me feel so uncomfortable. I saw this shadowy figure of a creature looking straight at me, and I swear that I thought it was looking straight into my soul. It was located at the right side bottom of my bed, and I froze up because my first thought was to try and quickly get off the left side of my bed and run to the door, but I physically couldn't because I felt like it knew what I was thinking. The staring match lasted for probably about an hour before I finally got the courage to say, screw it, and I tried to get out of the room because in my head I finally thought that it wouldn't be able to hurt me because it shouldn't be able to, just being a shadow. So quickly I got off the left side of my bed, but the traumatizing thing was that it somehow knew what I was going to do and mirrored my actions 10 times faster and got to the bottom of the left side of the bed, and the way it moved sounded like long nails hitting off the flooring of my room. Before I could do anything, it pounced at me, and I screamed like bloody murder because I thought it was going to kill me, but nothing happened, and when I opened my eyes, it wasn't there anymore. The whole situation just kind of left me stumped because after that experience, my life got a little bit rougher. The place it happened in was my grandparents' house, and their house has always been alright and no supernatural background at all. But after that experience, my gran had been acting more negative towards me, and I've only just realised it recently that it was around the same time as that we'd experienced. And because of it, I decided to move out to live with my mum in a different country. I've never told my grandparents about the experience, but they keep telling me on the phone saying that my old room keeps creaking, or they hear scratching noises as if something is running around in my room, but I don't know how because my room has always been quiet, even when I was living there. I'm just super stumped at the moment because I don't know what to think. So we recently purchased a home and moved in November 2nd, 2019. But we've only been there for about 1.5 weeks at this point, and within that time we've had 3 really odd experiences, all occurring between 1:30 and 2:30 in the morning on different nights. So the first experience and the second night in the home, after a tiff with the wife, I decided to sleep in our nicely finished basement. I went to sleep at around 10 p.m, woke at around 12 p.m. to the sound of footsteps on carpet. I thought it might have been the kids sneaking around. They get out of bed at night and come to our room. I looked up, but didn't see anything. I checked the time on my phone, but didn't think much of it, and I just went back to sleep. Around 1:30, I heard the footsteps again, and this time it sounded like more than one person. I thought it was my wife and kids coming down to find me, so I looked up from the futon, but I didn't see anyone. I started to feel a bit creeped out by this because I definitely heard footsteps, but I thought it was all in my head, and I just tried to go back to sleep. But within a minute of laying back down, I felt someone lean on me with their arms. I freaked out because there was no one there. I threw my covers off and ran upstairs and got in bed with my wife. I convinced myself at the time that it was just in my head because I was in a liminal sleep state or something. The second experience, about 3 days after that night, the home has an integrated fire alarm system, so when one alarm goes off, they all go off. It's around 2 a.m. and we're all sleeping upstairs when all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. My wife and I get up to investigate, and within 20 seconds the alarm stops. We just chalked it up to the system doing an auto test because, well, what else could it be? We go back to bed, but we're both a little bit creeped out and on high alert. Now, the third experience was about a week after night 2. This was last night, and this is what caused me to make this post. So, I was sleeping in my toddler's bed with her to help her to get to sleep. My wife was sleeping with our 6-year-old in our bedroom, and around 1:30 my toddler woke up and went to my wife. I saw her leave and I continued to sleep. And around 1:40 my wife runs into the room where I was sleeping, turns on all the lights along the way, yelling that there was somebody in the house. She said that she and my toddler heard a deep man's voice speaking on the first level of the home. Now, I'm very freaked out, and I think that it's a home intruder. I turn on all the downstairs lights from the top of the stairs. I yell that I'm calling the police. There aren't any sounds of movement, so I muster my courage and I head downstairs to investigate. My heart is racing, and I go into the kitchen to grab a kitchen knife and begin exploring the house. And, long story short, I find nothing. The doors are locked, the windows are locked, the garage is closed. I go back upstairs and fall asleep after about an hour when my adrenaline finally dissipates, and my poor wife can't sleep for the rest of the night. So, what do you guys think's going on? The house is not old, built in 2002. The family we purchased it from built the home themselves and were the only occupants. No one's died here, and I don't really believe in ghosts, and this house does not seem like a candidate for such activity anyways. Is it all just coincidence? Do you guys have any plausible ideas? My parents decided that we were going on a trip down to Tasmania when I was 15, and I stayed with my grandparents. Whilst they were gone, I had this really weird dream where I was flying around and quite happy, and eventually I landed in front of an old house and walked up the stairs and went inside. When I got in, a small girl was in front of me, and she was wearing a cream-coloured long-sleeved dress, black stockings, shoes, and a bonnet. She looked happy to see me. She told me that she'd been waiting for me, and she was lonely, and her name was Annabelle. I asked where her mum and dad were, and her face just turned really sad, and she grabbed my hand and led me down the hallway to, I guess, an outhouse or something, and slowly pushed open the door. I didn't really see anything, but I got a feeling of her mum and dad died, and she told me that they all got sick. I felt myself floating again, and Annabelle got upset and started crying, asking me not to leave. I woke up, and I didn't really think a lot about it, apart from that it was strange and that I could remember all the details. The next night, I'm about to go to sleep, and in my ear, I hear Annabelle's voice say my name. It obviously freaked me out a bit, but I eventually fell asleep with the lights on. So, my parents returned from their holiday, and before they can say anything, I ask if they bought a house, and they both look at me dumbfounded and ask how I knew. I had a sense and ask if they have pictures of the house, and the house is exactly the same as the one in my dream. My mum makes me sketch the layout and says that it's the same apart from the back room, but the house is 100 years old. I tell her that it's not empty, and I tell her about Annabelle. My mum has her own stories at this point, and so she believes me, and a year after they move in, I finish school and move down. At first, I dream of Annabelle and we're happy, just hanging out. Every time I dream of her, my dad is woken up by the sounds of things rustling around in the house. Then, Annabelle starts making herself known. We hear whispering and footsteps, and no one's too freaked out at this point. The first night in my new place, I was living with a friend, and we were watching telly when the lights flicker, and we both look at each other, and I'm about to say, "That's weird," and then every cupboard door and room door in the entire house just flies open with force. We just grabbed each other and sat there frozen for quite some time, and neither of us really slept that night. A few nights go by without incident, and I'm dreaming again, and I'm somewhere pitch black, and I see Annabelle, and I go to say hi, but her face is different. It's angry and deformed, and she's standing a few meters from me when she lunges and grabs my nightdress and starts shaking me with force, growling and screaming in my face that I left her. I wake up terrified and throw my light on, and everything in my room is overturned, like I'd been robbed or something. I can't move and I can't speak, so I sit there for hours with my light on until daytime. I eventually get out of bed and go to the kitchen, and my friend is sitting at the table, and I ask her as normally as I can how her night was, and she tells me that she didn't sleep a wink because of the rustling of plastic bags, but every time she tried to find the noise, she just couldn't. I break down at this point, and I tell her about Annabelle and show her my room, and that night I decided to apologize to Annabelle out loud and tell her why I left. My parents were getting divorced, and years go by and nothing happens, and then I have my daughter, Jasmine. Jasmine was around 3 and playing in her room, and I went to go and check on her, and She was mumble singing kind of, and just talking to herself when I peeked around the corner, and she had a bonnet on her head. I'd never bought one and never got one gifted, and she turned and looked at me, and I just went rigid because it was my daughter, but she looked different, and said, "Mummy, why didn't you call me Annabelle?" At this point, I pulled the bonnet off of her head, scooped her up, and I gave her to her dad, went outside, and I just torched it. I don't know if it was out of fear or anger or confusion or frustration, but that day I threatened Annabelle that if she ever come near me or my child again, that I'd send her away forever. And it's been 8 years, and I haven't seen or heard anything again. Oh, and by the way, my grandmother did some research on the house and did in fact find out that a little girl and her family and all the members of the house, they died in there because of measles or something. Let me begin by saying that I'm female, and this happened when I was about 13 years old. My family is really strict and never let me or my siblings spend the night over anyone's house. However, the day that the incident took place, I'd begged my parents for nearly an hour to allow me to spend the night over at my cousin's house. Finally, they got so agitated that they just agreed to let me stay the night at my cousin's house. So my aunt and uncle were kind of hands-free parents, so they pretty much let us do whatever we wanted, no questions asked. My cousin and I decided that we wanted to get some shawarmas from a restaurant down the street. It was about a 10-minute walk, and it wasn't that late out, but it was a cold Michigan winter night, so it got dark pretty early. We left the house at 6 p.m, but it felt much later than that due to the darkness outside. We got to the restaurant just fine, bought a couple of sandwiches each, and decided to eat them on the walk back to her house. Now, although her house was close to the restaurant, we were a little freaked out from the darkness and agreed that it would be best to take a shortcut back to her house. The shortcut meant that we had to walk through an alley behind a bunch of businesses nearby. Before we entered the alley, we looked down the alley to see if anyone was there, and we didn't see anyone, so we felt that it would be fine if we went ahead and just walked down the alley. We were walking at a leisurely pace, just enjoying our sandwiches, and suddenly we heard a couple of boys call from behind us. It was a loud, "Hey you," and we tried to act cool and just kept walking, but they started shouting louder, so we turned around to see if they were talking to us or somebody else. There were at least 4 teenage boys calling at us, and they started running towards us, yelling that they were going to mess us up. We got really scared, obviously, so we threw our food on the floor and we just ran as fast as we could. But being that they were much older than us and much faster, they started gaining up on us really fast, and finally one of the boys reached us. He stretched his arm out and grabbed me by the hair, and I started screaming and begged him not to hurt me. His friends caught up to me and started laughing, and my cousin kept running and was crying hysterically. I was begging them not to hurt me, and I was crying really hard at this point. They said that they were going to make me pay for running away and not responding the first time they called us. They were dragging me down the alley in the opposite direction of my cousin's house, and I was sobbing the entire time, and about 10 minutes had passed when one of the boys said that we were almost at his house and I was really going to pay for my actions. And just then, a van horn started blaring. It was as if someone just laid their hand down on the horn and wouldn't take it off. The van was coming right towards us, and as soon as it got in front of us, the van stopped and out jumped my 7 male cousins. My cousin was the only girl in the family and the youngest of 8 children, while my female cousin sat in the van crying. One of them grabbed me and threw me into the van, and they beat the ever-living crap out of the boys who had been messing with me. It was a close call that night, and since then, I've never walked down that alleyway again. I moved into a 70s-era house with 2 roommates called D and E last November. Simply put, the house is weird. Weird construction, weird decoration, weird neighbors, just weird vibes all around. As far as I know, it's only belonged to 1 or 2 families. Dee's dad bought it in April, and there's never been a death on the property, but regardless, I strongly believe that we're unwillingly sharing it with a third roommate. So, it started around January for me. The first incident was just really jarring as well. I was getting ready to take a shower and listening to music on my Bluetooth speaker, and as I was standing at the mirror, there were 3 loud knocks on the door. I thought that I was home alone, so I turned my music down and yelled Dee's name to see if it was her, as she gets annoyed if we play music too loudly while she's studying or trying to nap. But no one answered. So I checked outside the door, and her dog was laying against it, but I was alone. For reference, this dog barks if he hears a car door slam within a 2-mile radius of here, so it's an actual problem how high-strung he is, yet he hadn't even noticed what had just happened. I immediately decided that this place was haunted at this point, and my music had upset someone, or I was having a mental breakdown and hallucinating, or something like that. But it slowly became more apparent that we were dealing with something here. Things started falling off kitchen counters at random while we were just sitting in the living room. The dog's tennis balls would just roll across the floor in front of us, and there were more random noises, but it was all harmless at this point. In the past couple of weeks, it's all gotten more frequent as well. We're up to unexplainable things happening a few times a day, in fact, all 3 of us at different times. Eventually, he and I decided to dub our new friend Perry. Anyway, I work weird hours, and I'm usually off around 1 to 3 a.m, but I mostly just want to sit on the couch and watch TV when I get home, so I'm alone at night a lot and experience the brunt of things. I feel like I'm being watched all the time, which I've learned to deal with. I hear things fall off the tables and counters and then proceed to roll around on the floor, and I just kind of ignore it. I get very, very bad feelings if I look into mine and Dee's bathroom in the dark, and I see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, and sometimes I'll see a figure that disappears after a split second. I've never felt unsafe, though, as I try to be mindful and think of our household guest as a separate person who wants its space, respected like any other person. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as he lets me watch Futurama in peace, then I'm fine. But today in particular, he's been really rowdy. I've been keeping track, and since I got home at 7:30 p.m, 5 separate objects have been knocked off the kitchen counter. The dog began barking at nothing and absolutely wouldn't stop for around 10 minutes 2 hours ago. But the thing that worries me is that E was actually scratched this morning. I've been scratched by something once before, and it was in an extremely haunted abandoned prison in an area known for having really aggressive experiences, so this really freaks me out. He showed me the marks on his arm, and they were really weird as well. 4 thin straight lines from his wrist to the middle of his forearm, and definitely not something that he could have done himself without realizing. I mean, they kind of look like cat scratches. Either way, I'm worried that things are going to keep escalating to the point that I no longer feel safe by myself in this house. I don't mind sharing my space with a paranormal friend, but now that he's starting to get violent, I would really appreciate some ideas on how to handle this. Apparently burning sage is a pretty aggressive tactic. I'll try to do that last if I can. So I met a guy on Tinder, and we really started to hit it off. We'd been chatting for a few weeks, and even discovered that we had mutual friends. I was pretty intoxicated one night, was feeling social, and decided to call an Uber to his place. Once I got there, we talked outside for a while, and ended up vibing even better in person. I opened up to him about my health problems, and he opened up to me about his older sister who had passed away from a similar condition to mine. I was curious about his sister, but I definitely didn't want to pry. Anyway, we walked into his house, and as soon as I walked in, it smelled like 1,000 dead rats were just rotting under the floorboards. I was still pretty drunk, so I tried to forgive it because, hey, sometimes animals just die under your house or in the walls, and there's nothing you can really do about it, right? I start to look around, and the whole house looks like a cluttered storage unit, and he takes me to his room, which is seemingly normal, kind of feminine, but that's cool, and we hook up. I ended up falling asleep there and woke up at around 10 a.m. to the stench of just death. I opened my eyes, feeling very sober, and started to look around the room. I noticed that only girls' clothes were hung in the closet. I start to assume that I've possibly been cheated with, and then I see a giant black binder on his nightstand. When we woke up, I decided to jokingly ask him what's in that giant binder, and turns out it was every single episode of Golden Girls printed out. He said that he read it at work, and it's the only show he'll ever watch. Okay, I asked him what he did for work, something I definitely should have known by this point, and he dodged the question. I sat up and looked at the pillow that I'd been cozily sleeping on, and it had no pillowcase and was covered in what looked to be old blood. And it looked like the blood had been coughed onto it. I started putting the unpleasant pieces together, and I asked as sensitively as I could, "Hey, was this your sister's room?" And I noticed the clothes in the closet and whatnot, and he says, "Yeah, and this is her bed. I haven't changed or washed anything, and it makes me feel better to be in her bed. This is actually where I held her when she died, and you remind me so much of her. I really, really like you." And then casually tried to hook up with me like he didn't just drop unsettling news. Now, I did feel immensely sorry for him, but I needed to get out of there. So I made some excuse and I left. I decided to not entirely ghost him because of how bad I felt for him, and he was clearly dealing with some really dark stuff. We kept in contact for a few weeks until I went on my Find My Friends app and noticed that he had clearly taken my phone while I was asleep that night and shared my location with himself. I called him and I went off at this point. This is not my first rodeo with a stalker type, and I was not dealing with it. He told me that he couldn't believe that I thought he would do that, and I'm being a really terrible person dumping him because his cat had recently died. And at that point, I just blocked him. After he said that about his cat, combined with his tendency to hold on to things, it really makes me wonder what that smell actually was. Let's hope that it's not what I think it is. No one ever believed these kind of situations 17 years ago, and it was disheartening back then and even now. I'm 31 now, but was a teen when I was walking home one sunny day. It was winter, but winter in Florida is just a nice cool breeze. I remember holding a Tupperware in my hand that was still hot, containing pasta and broccoli my grandma had just made. It was really cool living one block away from my grandma because a quick 10-minute walk meant that I got some really good leftovers. In between my house and her house was a patch of woods, but thorns and ticks prevented me from taking a shortcut through there. Now, I remember looking down at the sidewalk just as I reached the middle of the patch of woods to my right. I heard someone ask, "Hey, where are you going?" And I looked up and to my left, towards the road, and a thin man in a white van with his window rolled down smiled at me. He was driving the opposite direction of the way I was walking, and I simply said home and continued to walk. He started to say, "Hey," over and over again, so I looked back to see him hanging out of the driver's side window. And then he says, "I'll give you a ride home, come here." I kept walking though, and I loudly said, "No thanks," and I stopped and turned around when I heard him drive away. I began walking again, creeped out, wishing that the woods didn't run so long next to the sidewalk, and I remember wishing I was home already. I was super alert at this point now, hearing every critter in the bush to my right rustling leaves and scurrying about. I pick up my pace, reminding myself that those woods were packed with lizards. I even said it to myself out aloud. It's just lizards running about, silly, but then I hear a vehicle coming up behind me. Out of fear, I look back, and to my horror, it's the same white van with the man still smiling. The van slows down next to me, and a big, huge, angry-looking man flung open the side door and jumped out. I turned to my right and began running as fast as I could into the woods. I was jumping over bushes and long vines, clenching my grandma's Tupperware for dear life, and I looked back once, and the thick brush of the woods was actually slowing the big man down. I knew just going straight that I would reach my backyard guarded by a chain-link fence. I remember the thorns and the sticks slicing my skin, but I couldn't feel the pain. I just kept thinking, run. Once I reached the fence, I chucked the Tupperware and hoisted myself over, ripping my jeans and face planted on the ground on the other side with a loud thud. I ran onto my porch and began banging the back door. My dad lets me in, and I'm literally panicking, covered in dirt and cuts, trying to lock the back door. I felt safe to be back home with my dad and our Rottweilers, and he sat me down and started questioning me and immediately called the cops. The cops arrived, only two, and took a report, and they said that nothing like that had happened in my area before, and one even told me that lying for attention was against the law. I remember they left, and my dad swore that he believed me, that I could sleep in his room that night if I wanted, and I remember feeling really sad and frustrated about not being believed and going to bed without even eating the pasta with broccoli. It was hard to sleep or go anywhere for months after that because, well, I was scared. I was scared that the man was still out there. My dad ended up getting me a cell phone and installing an alarm system to help me feel safe. But, unfortunately, I still have issues being alone to this day. So I'm currently 19, and this happened in 2013 or 2014. I was 14 or 15 at the time. So I was on holidays with my mum, my younger brother, and my grandmother on my mother's side. We decided, since it was autumn or fall in Switzerland, to go to a warmer country, and we chose Turkey to do that. I wasn't used to the Turkish people at the time, so I was most of the time kind of embarrassed when they talked to me. At least as long as I was outside of the holiday resort, for example, the market. When we were inside the resort, I didn't have any problems. Everyone spoke English and were rather reserved as well, so that was pretty much usual for me. Anyways, that was until one dinner night. Being Swiss, we decided before we went on holidays that we'll manage the tip for the staff differently, with Swiss chocolate. So, this evening comes and we're getting served at the restaurants by a young Turkish waiter, and he was really nice and always made comments to me, so my grandma decided that it would be best if I'd give him his tip. Not in the mood to argue with my grandma, I did it. And that was a big mistake. He then asked for my number and promised me to text me right after a shift and all that sort of stuff, and I said politely no, since I already had a weird gut feeling about him, and my grandma gave him my number afterwards. Thanks, Grandma. And that's when the creepy thing started. He would constantly text me, demanding to know where I was and wanting to take me out to swim at the beach or show me his apartment. At this point, it's notable that he was 19 at the time, 4 to 5 years older than me. I always said no and then decided to tell my mum about this, and she just laughed it off together with my grandma as being cute and adorable, while he was getting more and more creepy. He told me that he loves me after just one day, and he told me that he'd moved to Switzerland for me since he had to do a workshop for being a waiter there or something, and it was just really over the top. But I started to notice that when I was at the pool in the resort, he would show up and just stare at me from time to time. He even once ran after me and tried to kiss me, and I swear that I thought my life was about to end when he ran towards me. As soon as we left the resort to head to the airport, though, I immediately blocked him on everything. But the story isn't over. He stalked me and found me on every social media site and texted me things from "I love you, baby, please unblock me" to "I'm going to find you and hurt you as much as you hurt me." Obviously, I just blocked him everywhere, and after a year from not hearing from him, I thought that was it and that I was okay. But I wasn't. He somehow found my Skype, on which I neither used my real name or my phone number, which was weird, and sent me pictures of him at a lake that was right next to my hometown. And he said, "Hey baby, I'd love to meet up with you. I miss you." And I didn't go to the city for like 3 months after this. I don't know if that picture was just a weird coincidence, or if maybe he knows exactly where I live. This happened around 2004. I was 13, hanging out with 2 of my girlfriends. We were about the same age, and we went swimming at one of their houses for a while and then decided to go for a walk. Walks were something we did often, and we would sometimes go pretty far. This time we didn't go that far at all, which I'm glad for because we definitely needed the energy. They lived a bit down the street from a local library, and there's a cemetery near it. The cemetery was medium to large, and we would wander past it or through it on adventures regularly. So it was starting to get dark, and we figured that we should turn around and go back to our house soon to change into our pajamas and watch a movie before bed. We were almost there, walking on the sidewalk next to the cemetery, and there was a red light at the intersection that we needed to cross. Well, one car crept up next to us, and the left side of the road was on our side of the sidewalk. We were walking against traffic, and now we were trying to walk a little bit faster, not comfortable with this car keeping our pace next to us. It was filled with 3 guys as well that were definitely much older than us, maybe in their late 20s. They started to catcall us and invite us to get into their car for a fun ride. My one friend decided to tell them off, and the men were now screaming at us as the light turns green. They pull into the right lane, avoiding some traffic, go through the green light, and we stop walking because we're watching these creeps drive away. But no, they bust a U-turn and speed back towards us head on. My friend and I scream for our third friend to just run, but she's an idiot and not moving, so we grab her hands and book it into the cemetery as deep as we can go and hide behind the headstones. I was behind one headstone by myself, and my smart friend was behind another one a couple of meters away. She had her hand over our friend's mouth because the idiot just wouldn't shut up. She kept whispering she didn't understand why we were so scared and hiding. But she finally kept quiet when she heard car doors slam from where we ran. 2 or 3 of the creeps were entering the cemetery, and they started calling for us to come out. They were saying they just wanted to have fun with us, and started saying the most disgusting things that they were going to do to us when they found us and caught us. But they were checking behind the headstones, making loud noises in hopes that we would scream and reveal where we were. I could hear my heart pounding, and they were getting closer and closer to us. I was thinking of all the ways that I could run and how I could fight back if they did catch me, but I was really scared for my friends. There were a couple of rows in front of me, and we all heard the third creep call them to give up on us and just to come back to the car to complete their beer run. All 3 of us ran out of the other end of that cemetery as fast as we could. We crossed the street and hid in the first bunch of bushes that we saw that were thick enough for what felt like about an hour. We wanted to make sure that they actually drove away and weren't just circling until we emerged. After our time in the bush, we all ran back to the house and we just collapsed behind the locked door. When I was 11 years old, my parents bought a historical house that was built in 1904. This was around 1996. A little background history on the house has revealed that it was a street over from a hospital that was once used as a house nursing students with a full kitchen downstairs and one also upstairs along with bedrooms on both floors. When we moved into the house, it hadn't been updated since the 70s and had also not been lived in since later that same decade. When we moved in, there was shag orange and yellow shag carpet, wood panels on the walls, and my parents' bathroom was done with black and white tile and had the large black and white flower print toilet paper still on the roll. Now, many strange things happened while we lived in this house, but 2 incidents clearly come to mind. My stepfather owned a lawn service business that became really successful, so he was out most of the sunny hours of the long Florida day, and my mum worked in a drugstore full-time, while my older sister, myself, and my younger brother were all in school full-time. One day, while myself and my sister were in middle school, I was in 6th grade and she was in the 8th, a colleague of my dad's came by the house around noonish to work out an arrangement for a commercial job. No one was home and there were no cars in the driveway, but he still proceeds to come out to our front door and knock anyway. And to his surprise, a girl about 12 years old, my age, wearing a knee-length white dress, answered the door. He asked if her dad was around to discuss the contract with him, and she politely told him that he wasn't, but if he wanted to leave a message, that she would happily pass it on to him once he arrived home. The man declined and said that he would just give him a call on his cell phone. Almost no one carried them at that point in time, but he did because of the amount of times that he was away from home, and he thanked the girl. He left thinking that it was clearly one of his daughters that had stayed home from school that day for whatever reason. He later called my dad and explained that he had come by the house and spoken to one of his daughters. and my dad was furious. It had been raining that morning, so both my sister and I were dropped off at about 8 a.m. and school was not released until 3:30 p.m. He was absolutely convinced, too, that I had skipped school because the description the man gave was almost identical to what I looked like at the time. When I got home that afternoon, I was completely grilled, and I just couldn't understand why my parents were so furious at me. I mean, I was in school the whole day, and so was my sister. So my mum called the school the next day and confirmed that I was indeed in all of the classes that day in question, and so was my sister. So my question is for you guys has anyone experienced any similar situations? Was it maybe some sort of weird out-of-body experience on my part? Or did this gentleman actually come face to face with my doppelganger or a ghost that haunted that house and just wanted some human interaction? I will never forget that incident as long as I live. So, 30 years ago, I'm about 13 or 14, and me and an older friend are babysitting for a 6-year-old girl and her younger brother. We had been told that sometimes the girl complains about seeing a ghost man in her bedroom and upstairs at night, and that he comes out through the attic or something. Now, I didn't believe a word of it. The kids are weird and just say weird things. So, we get the kids ready for bed, but they just wouldn't settle. The girl said that she felt scared and that her little brother started crying. She asked if she could sleep in her mum's bed till she got home, and the little brother wanted to go with her, so I tucked them in, told them silly stories, and laughed until they were both tired. Both kids were virtually asleep when we left, door ajar, hall light on, and an hour later, we're sitting downstairs watching The Equalizer, and all was good. The kids were definitely asleep, as I had to sneak past their room to use the bathroom once, and I had a quick peek on my way back. The little brother got a bit of a mini shoot snore going on, but apart from that, everything else was quiet. Back downstairs, we're watching TV a bit more, and about 20 minutes go by, and just out of nowhere, we hear banging, like really heavy banging. The kids scream immediately, and I run upstairs and meet the kids as they're running out of the room, and then there's another bang and another one. This time, I have eyes on the kids, so I know that they're not making the noise as well. The kids fly at me, and I grab the little brother and we rush downstairs and run into the front room to shut the door and all crash onto the sofa. Everything is silent apart from TV, which I switch off, and we sat in silence for about 5 minutes, just sort of holding each other and listening. After a few minutes, the girl with tears in her eyes just says in a matter-of-fact way, the man was angry because I wasn't in my own room, so he tried to push over a wardrobe and then started thumping the wall. This event has stayed with me all these years. So back in the day, I had several odd jobs that required I drive across the country. One was shipping horses, and I drove the truck from barns to shows or vice versa, and the other was working as a road crew for a rock band. Now, I was very, very young at the time, 16 to 20 years old, and for reference, I'm female, short, athletic, definitely the odd one out at a lot of rest stops and gas stations along the major routes, and I'm also tattooed, and I had a red mohawk which made me stand out more. Several weird things have happened that I remember, but first I want to say that Navajo Nation is really creepy. Always drove through it at night too. Never meant to plan it that way, but that's always how it happened. Oh, and another creepy place is northern Utah. Totally hills have eyes up there. Anyways, here's the first story. So, I was driving from Galveston, Texas to New Orleans, LA. Galveston had just been hit by the hurricane, and there was a weird serial killer moving through that city, so the vibe had already begun as weird. Just as I crossed the border from Texas to LA, I started to get super tired. It was really late, 3 a.m.-ish I think. Tried to find a gas station to pull over at and rest and fill up, but all of them were closed. So I ended up giving up, pulled into the next one which was closed, parked in the far corner of the lot, killed my car, a convertible Jeep at the time, and laid back my seat to get some sleep. Everything seemed quiet, and there were a few lights from the station that were on 24/7, but I parked far enough away that they couldn't really bother my eyes. So I eventually fall asleep. But I woke up with a start. I'd been dreaming, but I had like this gut instinct to just wake up. And as soon as I did, I immediately saw someone covered in mud, wearing rags, holding a knife, advancing slowly towards my car. He was maybe 5 feet away, moving forward, and my adrenaline kicked in immediately, and I switched the car on at this point. He lets out some guttural growl and then launches towards the car as I'm backing up. I barely miss him as he's grabbing at the vehicle. With the headlights on, I could see that he was covered in sores and the knife was all rusty and weird looking too, and I just sped out of there and didn't sleep again all the way to NOLA. And it freaked me out so badly that I never again slept in my car after that. The idea that he could have been watching me sleep for who knows how long it really got to me. The car was also a convertible, and he could have easily cut his way in. And that image of waking up to some crazy person advancing on me with a knife has also given me nightmares just for many years at this point. So, the second story was hauling horses from Kansas to Tucson, Arizona, driving a big Ford truck, a Julie, with a small trailer carrying 3 horses. Near Gallup, around 2 a.m., the back inner tire on the passenger side blows out. I pulled off the road and assessed the situation, and there was zero chance that I could change the tire myself given the trailer and Julie truck situation. And I'm tired and just weak from exhaustion, so I call a tow company and tried to find a temporary boarding place for the horses. But it's the morning of Easter Sunday, and literally no one is open. I'm going through the yellow pages, calling tow company after just tow company, and yes, I'm old, and this is pre-smartphones. Finally, I find a Native American tow company who also has a ranch with boarding for the horses and a truck to come grab the trailer. It was a godsend, but the guy and his wife who ran the company told me to be very, very careful not to leave my truck during the 2-hour drive that it would take for them to arrive. They said this in just such an emphatic way that I began to get really scared. They told me not to open the door for anyone and to just keep the doors locked. No one was really on the road, so I was just confused as to who could really be a threat out here, but I took them seriously and locked my doors, and I just waited. Strangely enough, I kept hearing this weird scratching sound on the back panel window of the truck, like someone was trying to open the small window back there, and a couple of times the truck would sway, which I figured was the horses, but it was pitch black out and there was no wind. I heard a few footsteps, but chalked it up to my imagination at the time, and I was getting scared out there alone and unable to move. Eventually, the nice couple with the tow truck and the other truck to haul the ponies shows up. They immediately and first move me from my cabin to the cabin of their truck, tell me not to move or open the door under any circumstances, and the couple is super fast. Lady deals with the horses, man gets my truck up on the tow bed, and they then drive me to the ranch, after the man drops my truck off at the local shop owned by his cousin, who he says will handle the flat on Monday. Anyways, long story short, this wonderful couple takes care of me and the horses, gets my truck tire fixed, and as I'm ready to leave on Monday afternoon, there's a story on the local news of a woman with a flat tire who was murdered along the same stretch of highway on Sunday evening. She'd been out changing a tire, and it just looks like someone murdered her. I asked the couple, and they didn't say much other than just to never get out of the car at night along that highway, ever. They said that it was pretty much certain death. They also gave me some bags of pot puree stuff to have burn in my truck cabin for protection, and I felt lucky to find these nice people, to be honest, but they definitely looked out for me, and never once did I feel unsafe staying at their house. I was 18 at the time and definitely knew nothing about safety along trucking routes. But from now on, when I drive through that area, I don't stop if I can avoid it. I just load up on gas, check tires in Flagstaff, and I just ride on through to Albuquerque. There's weird stuff out there on the reservations, and I don't pretend to know or want to know what it is. So, I haven't actually told anyone about this because, well, I think I imagined it. But I've been having nightmares about this, so I guess I just need to get it off my chest. So, I was hauling lumber on 36E between Fortuna, CA and Red Bluff, CA, on my way to the 5S. This was in 95 or 96, right before the coastal lumber industry folded. Route 36 is basically a glorified logging road. It twists through the mountain ranges and goes to one lane several times. Anyway, I got a late start, which was okay, as I like driving at night anyway. It was probably around 10 or 11 at night, I'd say. As I crept up into the mountains, there was a nasty bit of fog, and I rounded a corner, and suddenly there were all these deer just standing in the middle of the road in the fog. It was kind of creepy, just seeing all these deer standing in the fog in the middle of the road, and I'm used to seeing them running across the road, but not just standing there. So I blew my horn, and they all turned and just looked into my headlights, the ears twitching, the buck's antlers casting long twisted shadows into the fog, and I blew my horn again, and they just kind of lazily walked to the side of the road. I idled forward between them, and I looked out of my driver window and saw the bucks and the does warily looking back at me as I drove through them. But that wasn't the creepy part. You see, I reached the peak and I started back down. The fog on the eastern side abated, but as I rounded a corner, I saw a guy walking down the road, down the middle of the oncoming lane, his back to me, and he had shoulder-length black hair, was wet and stringy from the moisture that had been in the air, and he wore a faded blue wool-lined jean jacket, hands in his pockets, and darker jean pants. When my lights hit him, he swerved toward the shoulder of the other lane, giving me room, and then just the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced happened. I was going maybe 25 or 30 at this point, but as I came up to him, he suddenly bolted right in front of my truck. The last thing I saw was his wide black eyes and his mouth open in a silent type of yell, and a black pit in his white face shining in my headlights before just disappearing under the horizon of my hood. I practically stood on my brakes, the cab and the trailer behind me hopping, and I remember just thinking, holy crap. I hopped out of the cab immediately. I don't remember turning on the flashes, and I ran back behind the truck, and I saw him walking back up the hill, behind the truck, hands in his jacket pockets, his back illuminated by my red lights. And he looked back at me, and he had black eyes and like a black mouth, now grinning toothlessly at me. And then he just ran off into the trees at the edge of the road. I was confused and scared, and I didn't call out. I just got in my cab and I just drove on. I still dream about those white eyes and that unholy mouth just disappearing under my hood, and I just hope the dreams stop now that I've shared this. I'm now 26 years old, and these occurrences still bother me to this day. Recently, I brought them up with some of the friends involved, and I raised it into a discussion, and everyone just went silent, and we agreed to never talk about it again. I'll just refer to myself by B and my other friends by their first initials. So, before I start, I need to give some background information. It's important to understand the kind of place that these experiences happened in and around, along with the time period, the ages we were at the time, and the kind of homes we came from. It all started when I was about 14 or 15, and continued until I was about 18, with one significant happening somewhat recently. Growing up, I lived in a small town, a town small enough that we had nothing better to do than ride our BMX bikes or dirt bikes if we were one of the lucky ones. My mum was just a raging alcoholic, and my dad wasn't around much. My friends, whom I'm still friends with to this day, came from similar backgrounds. Somehow people with these types of upbringings seem to just find each other. I don't know how it works, but it always does. We also lived within 5 minutes of each other, and these facts led to me being the young one. All my friends were a year or two older than me, but aside from the light-hearted jabs at being the freshman, even though at the beginning we weren't even in high school yet, we were very tightly knit. Now, these facts are important because I want to emphasize how we were the type of kids who did not want to go home and took every chance that we could to leave our personal problems behind. The town at the time had a supermarket, a gas station, I think, and a few takeout places. We were a good half an hour away from any real civilization, and most of us, not even being old enough to drive, we had to make our own entertainment. Usually this took the form of exploring the woods, skating at the local middle school, and getting chased out by bored police with nothing better to do, playing video games, or, in my case, playing my own personal demons away on my guitar, though my amplifiers were never loud enough to shut out how broken my home was. Anyway, I was a trapped only child. Let's just put it that way. So, we were very active kids though, and we usually took our bikes to the derelict train tracks that the town hated, as they drew kids like us with dirt bikes or mountain bikes and nothing better to do. We were never the malicious kind, though there were plenty of graffiti artists and junkies that hung out under the old underpasses or in the old storage sheds in the woods, or at the location that this story is about. But that wasn't us. We were just explorers. Something that continued in my life, in fact, as I'm now a musician and an urban explorer on my own time and a mechanic professionally. That'll be somewhat important later on as well. Oh, and two of the friends in this story wound up joining the military as well. This will be important later on due to one particular experience. So, this would have been about 2005, I think. I had cringy long hair and skinny jeans, and I had a massive crush on the singer from Paramore. So as I mentioned earlier, the tracks. They were important because they were like highway to us. One of my friends had a dirt bike, and we used to get up to 3 people at a time on it, and from there we could get to the next town over, or even the area with a local mall about half an hour away by car, in record time, if we were so inclined. But, as I said, we were the exploration type, so more often than not we all took our BMX or mountain bikes, as not all of us grew up privileged enough to own dirt bikes or quads, to the tracks, and we'd ride, every day during the summer and after school the rest of the year, when we didn't just skip, that is, being the kind of adventurous, slightly headstrong, and a little too brave for our own good kids that we were. You see, in the town I grew up in, there's this lake, a very large lake, and on that lake, up until about 2001, was a trailer park, a summer camp, and some upscale and very old houses, depending on which side of the lake you were on. Now, around 2001, the lake was condemned. The official reason, as far as I know, was polluted water, but there were some other rumours. One story in particular that persisted pretty heavily. But before I get to that, I want to note that the lake was polluted. If you dropped a rock or a cement block in, you could watch the water change colour with oil and debris from the abandoned housing developments and camps. That may be the reason, or it could have been something a little more, dark. Either way though, after the lake was condemned, everyone moved out, and they moved out quickly as well. All of the trailers, the houses, the camp, they remained. There were even some cars and boats left behind, and this, of course, led to rumours. So many rumours, but nobody knew why exactly at the time, and nobody really knew anyone that lived back there. It was all strange and mysterious, and because it was a large development, maybe for whatever reason, people had known families that lived there and chose not to speak about it, or weren't allowed to or something. I don't know, it's just a question in a sea of them, I guess, but either way, no one really knew exactly why these people moved. As it was quite out of the way, the only way to get there was a secluded back road through the woods, including a bunch of turns that you had to memorize not to get lost, if you were going there by car, but I didn't do that myself until a few years ago. We always entered from the back though, the side the train tracks ran along. They actually ran right by the lake on the trailer park side, and it was about a 10-minute bike ride to get there from our houses. Now, before we had ever been there, we heard all the stories as well, and we knew people had stayed away for whatever reason for years. The most retold urban legend was that a kid named Johnny had stolen a canoe, either from the camp or the trailer park, in the middle of the night sometime in 2000, and the story went that he took the boat and, in the dark out on the lake, which I can confirm is absolutely massive, despite being so secluded, he lost his bearings and panicked and somehow capsized the boat and drowned. But it didn't end there. Allegedly, they dredged the lake, after weeks of searching for him, after the owner of a boathouse on the far side of the lake realized one of the boats was gone, and had actually washed up in the camp section of the lake, which was much smaller and separated by a very narrow waterway. They eventually found many Johnnies at the bottom of the lake, not just him. They found, depending on whoever was telling the story, anywhere from 10 to 50 other bodies, and according to the myth, that was the real reason that everyone just up and left, because after this event, inexplicable things started happening. Like I said, the lake was definitely polluted, and that was most likely the reason. I'm naturally a bit of a skeptic, though the entire thing remains an enigma because there was no local press that had ever talked about it, and I've never been able to explain the things we've experienced there. Whatever the real reason, though, was for the condemnation and the ensuing eviction of an entire community, it remains a mystery to this day as far as I know. An official explanation was never publicly stated. Though, I do know that people used to dump oil cans and even cars back there, which may have contributed to the pollution of the lake. But anyway, I'm getting away from the point. The point was, it was a massive lake surrounded with a massive complex maze of trailer homes, older homes and camp areas, and all of it was up and abandoned basically overnight, with nobody knowing why. By the time we were about 14 or 15, it started to become a hotspot for teenagers as well. A place to escape the world, and there was no access from the road at the time as it was gated off, and the chances of being caught for trespassing there were little to none. One afternoon, we were on our bikes, like most days, and I remember vividly that we ran into a group of older kids on BMX bikes in the woods. They were smoking weed, which none of us had any interest in. In fact, I'd like to get that out of the way. I didn't then and never had done drugs, and at the time these events transpired, neither did my friends, at least not the ones that frequented the lake with me. We got to talking, and it turned out that one of them had a backpack full of fireworks, though. They said that they were going to the lake to shoot them off the dock at the boathouse, and at this point, we'd all heard the stories, but we'd never actually been there ourselves. It was further than we usually travelled, and we'd all heard the stories, but being teenagers, we had safety in numbers mentality, so me and the two friends that I was with, combined with the group that we ran into, made 7 of us. And upon arriving after a long and rocky ride on our BMX bikes, we finally came to the lake. Even getting to it from the trackside proved difficult, as there was a ravine between the tracks and the trail on the other side. But the older kids showed us the trick. "Watch this," one of them scoffed. He then proceeded to ride as hard as he could straight down the incline. He then, upon hitting the bottom, took his feet off the pedals and jumped to the pegs on the back wheels, and the momentum carried him right up the other side. Now, none of us were strangers to doing jumps and tricks and other stupid, reckless things on our bikes, and so we followed. As soon as we were on the other side of that ravine, on that ledge, we felt that this place was just special, if that's the word to use. Maybe not. Maybe foreboding is the better word. But that day, it went off without a hitch. They showed us where the boathouse was, allegedly the same boathouse that Johnny had taken his final tragic midnight boat trip from. While I did believe that Johnny was real, I didn't know how much I believed that the rest of the urban legends were true. But, like I said, that day was just a good day. The older kids smoked their weed, and we were given full reign over the massive supply of fireworks, and we would walk out to the end of the dock and shoot bottle rockets into the water and watch the splash when they blew up. It had to be timed just right, mind you, and even the older kids were impressed that we could do it. We spent the rest of that day trying to top each other with tricks, and my friend, M, won with an idea that he cooked up to pack an old beer bottle with firecrackers, stick a bottle rocket in it, light it, and then throw it out over the water, and it would cause a massive explosion that sounded like a shotgun blast. And we watched the old green glass shards glimmer in the summer sunlight as they scattered into the water, hitting it like rain. At the time, I didn't realize that M had climbed to the roof of the dilapidated boathouse. After his firework trick, he called down to us, myself and the other friend, Dee, and some of the older kids. Now, M was and still is the very definition of the all-American schoolboy. Why he associated with us, I never knew, even though we remain good friends to this day. He had the build of a jock, he had perfect blonde hair and blue eyes, and he excelled at everything that he did. I was a tiny little thing with long black hair, a lip piercing, and I dressed completely in black, even in the dead of summer. And Dee was the nerdy type. He excelled in math and science, and even tutored me in these, as I was one of those troubled children, frequently visiting the school counselors because I had few friends. My art in the art class that I took was influenced by H.R. Geiger more than Rembrandt, and in the guitar class that I took, I was more interested in playing Black Sabbath and the latest top 40 hits. So, we were pretty much the definition of a motley crew. And that's not even including the fourth friend who would later join us in these adventures, who I'll call E. But back to that day. So the boathouse was 2 floors, and it was built on a ledge. The dock came from the second floor and went about 30 feet into the water, I'd say. The first floor seemed to be storage and maintenance, for the many small boats that would have to be stored in there years prior. Some outboard motors were still on racks along the walls, and tools were scattered everywhere, and there was a staircase that went down to a boat launch. I remember I was a bit fixated on that launch, funnily enough, wondering if Johnny really spent the last moments of his life there. And I was still in that area when I heard M call out, "B, D, guys, get up here, you gotta see this." He sounded excited, and I had to pry myself away from that boat launch, but I rejoined D and the older kids. We got up to the roof via climbing the busted-out windows, and when we got up there, I noticed M was looking across the lake with an almost hungry look. And when I saw what he was seeing, an entire housing complex, an entire community completely abandoned, he explained, "We've got to go." And I agreed immediately. Dee was apprehensive at first. One of the older kids pulled me aside and said to me quietly, "Look, man, we stay on this side. That side is bad news. We've been over there a couple of times, and it's just weird." He seemed genuinely concerned, too, and he told me more about the abandoned homes, how everything was still in them. The furniture, appliances, vehicles, personal belongings, all just left behind. Some of the houses were basically untouched, and he told me that those were the ones to look out for. He also informed me that there was a hermit who still lived in there, in a house that nobody could get near because there were stacks and literal stacks of old car bodies surrounding the property, and a chain-link gate on the driveway. And I later saw for myself that this was, in fact, true. I asked him what he meant by this, though, but he just kind of shrugged it off and walked away. Obviously, this was not going to stop us. We had already decided that this was our new spot, and it almost became an obsession to explore every bit of this place that we could. And so, the very next day, we returned, and we rode to the other side of the lake, and boy, it was a long ride. The area we'd seen from the boathouse the day before was basically a peninsula in the center of the lake, and the weirdness that he described, it was definitely there. In fact, he may have even understated it. First off, something we noticed immediately was the hum. If you don't know what the hum is, it's like a phenomenon reported worldwide of a low, almost inaudible but steady sound that almost sounds like a distant motor running. It's, well, a hum, I guess. It's really the only way to describe it. But we definitely all heard it, and though I didn't find out about the phenomenon until much later, I very much believe that that's what it was. We even tried to record it multiple times, and we never could, and though it could be written up to something like a generator on the hermit's property, it was audible, and at the time, so low volume all over the lake that it was weird. And it was there no matter where you were. Anyway, so over the next few days and weeks and months, we explored. We explored every house, every trailer, though we did avoid the hermit's property, and the older kids had not been kidding about everything being left behind. I mean, absolutely everything was left there. From calendars on walls to clothes in closets, everything was left behind. Thinking back on this place, only one notable occurrence really happened before we found the old summer camp, months later. We had begun hanging out around the lake, either at the boathouse or on that water, though we never went into the water, as, like I said, it was extremely polluted. Though we did, at one point, take a left-behind rowboat out to a small island on the lake and planted a flag of our design. I still wonder to this day if it's still there, in fact. But this occurrence, like most or all of them, I've never been able to explain away. So, there was a house that was pretty much intact, and we actually had a code that we wouldn't break anything that wasn't already broken. But the desires to get into this one house that we never could, it really burned away at us. And eventually we realized that under overgrowth there was actually a storm cellar that presumably opened to an exterior set of stairs to the basement. The problem was, someone had put a cement slab over it. At this point, it was me, M, D, and E, and it took the four of us almost an hour to move that slab. It was heavy as anything, and we ended up taking shifts of 2 at a time, kicking and dragging the slab off the entrance. But we finally did it. And remember, it took us almost an hour, if not longer, to move this thing. So, when the way was clear, it led down to a dark concrete staircase, longer than we'd thought, and myself and M, being the two most interested, descended the stairs slowly, and were met with a locked door. A pretty new door by the looks of it, newer than the house at least, and a regular front door type deal. There were glass pane windows, an ugly shade of lime green, but the windows were pitch dark. M, annoyed at the fact that we'd spent so much time and effort on a dead end, lightly kicked the door. And this was the beginning of it all. Because something on the other side of that door kicked back. M and I were up those stairs and on our bikes so quickly that D and E had trouble catching us. But when we finally stopped and explained what happened, E called us pussies and said that he'd go back and check. Though, of course, he wouldn't do so alone. E was, for a lack of a better comparison, basically the Eric Cartman of our group. He was overconfident, manipulative, and just not a very likable person. But he always tagged along with us, and he was consistent, I'll give him that. So I agreed to go back with him, as I knew what I heard, and it was broad daylight, so I saw the door move. M also agreed as long as D came, so it would be the four of us again. We quickly returned, and I kid you not, we could not have been any longer than 10 minutes, and the slab had been returned to its original position. None of us said a word at this point, and we just got the hell out of there as fast as we could. But of course, this didn't stop us from returning. We rationalized that it was just someone messing with us, possibly the hermit, right? Though, deep down, I think we all knew that that was impossible. It had taken 4 of us an hour at least to move that piece of cement. But weeks went by with no other events, save sometimes we thought that we could see lights through the trees, but not like hikers with flashlights either. These were like amber or almost fire, but too solid. On more than one occasion, we tried to find the source, but by the time that we get there, it would be long gone. And this leads me into the next memorable occurrence. Because at some point, our teenage minds decided that it would be a good idea to start going there at night. I don't remember exactly why we made that decision, but boy, do I wish we never had. In the beginning, just like daytime, nothing happened. Now, kids from around the area often partied on the boathouse side of the lake until, well, into the morning, and sometimes during the day we'd run across other groups of people exploring the ruins. On the far side, one night, we met up with some mutual friends at the old summer camp. It took us a long time to find it, and we almost turned back many times. It was on a completely separate part of the lake, and we did this in the dark on bicycles. We were planning to have a bonfire and just kind of hang out there, and it wasn't until we went to the camp that the occurrences started happening in earnest. Now, I just want to mention here too that I didn't like it. From the moment we found the place, I just had a gut feeling that something just wasn't right. That night, I remember stepping away from the fire and the 20 or so people who had gathered to take a leak in the woods. I'm really self-conscious, so I went a bit deeper into the trees than I probably should have, and for a minute, it was silent. But then, I started to hear what sounded like whispering. At first, I just kind of wrote it off as a breeze through the trees or something, but it increased in volume, and soon it was almost deafening. And so, I just ran the hell out of there back towards the fire, where Dee immediately asked if I was messing with them. And I said no. Why? And apparently because we saw the lights again, and it was around where you were into the woods, and we thought you had a flashlight or something and were trying to mess with us. We locked eyes, and he saw the panic in mine, and I saw the realization in his, and he told me that I was white as a sheet, and I'm already naturally very pale. I told him exactly what happened, and a few older kids stayed behind, but at that point, we left, and most of them did too. However, I vowed to go back during the day at some point, because I wanted a rational explanation. Now that we knew how to get to the camp, we decided it was just too far for BMX bikes, especially if we needed to get out quickly for whatever reason that could arise. And so, Em had a dirt bike, and I rode passenger when we went back to check it out. By this time, E had his license and parked his car somewhere on the other side of the lake and walked the rest of the distance through the trails to meet us. But seeing the old summer camp cabins in daylight was really no better. There was a sense of impending doom just looming everywhere, but we soldiered on. We returned to the approximate place in the woods where I'd been, and we found the remains of what looked like some sort of animal sacrifices. It could have been the work of a coyote, as we have an overpopulation of them here, if not for the fact that there was a raccoon splayed out and nailed directly to a tree. In the daylight, we weren't scared so much as curious, and we just kind of had to accept the possibility that there could have been people in the woods messing with us. Not that the idea that some crazy cultist that being hundreds of feet away from us a few nights prior was not a comforting thought or anything. It just gave us a plausible and rational explanation for what happened. Moving on to the cabins themselves, there was again just a bad sense of impending doom and a feeling of just being watched all the time. We went through all of them. Most of them were like the trailer homes and houses on the other part of the lake. Everything's still in place, but we braved opening a refrigerator, solely because we wanted a time frame, and we found a ketchup bottle with an expiration date of January 2000. This surprised me as well, because the cabins just looked so much more derelict than the apparent time they'd been left. But one of the cabins, I think it was the last one that we went through, was more untouched than the others. Sleeping bags were still rolled out in cots, there was a Boy Scout vest on the kitchen table. It had the heaviest feeling atmosphere of any of them as well. There was a painting on the wall in the living room area, and at this painting, just the thought of it chills me to the core to this day, because it was a portrait. I don't know of who, but it almost looked like Vlad the Impaler, and was just really out of place. It was so stark in contrast to the rest of the cabin, and I felt like the eyes were just staring into my soul. Em was also freaked out by it. I don't know exactly why, and I still don't. It was just one of those almost Silent Hillish, out-of-place type things. I broke our rule about breaking things too, and I tore that thing straight off the wall, walked right by Em and E out of the cabin, and tossed it straight into the lake. I must admit that may have been a big mistake. A few weeks went by, and we decided that we would still hang out on the boathouse side and the trailer park area. Over time, we ended up mostly forgetting the events at the camp area, and we began just staying late at night again. And eventually, the main focal point of this story. This was the event that really still bothers me to this day as well, because there's just no way that I can explain it away. Being poor kids that relied on our bikes for transportation and treated them like extensions of our personal selves, and we were always salvaging for parts from abandoned bikes in the woods, on corners with free signs on them and all that sort of stuff. And there was a shed on that lake that was full of old bicycles, and it was just a gold mine for us. But it was behind a larger trailer home, One that we had never really given a second glance, as we'd seen so many of those abandoned trailer homes by that point that it was just kind of common. Well, one night, we were sitting around a small fire that we'd made near the boathouse, and we were really bored, so we decided to do something that we'd never done before: explore a few houses at night. Realizing that this would mean passing the hermit's house, we decided against going down that trail. Someone, I think it was D, brought up the house by the shed. Now, right off the bat, I have to admit that I didn't like the idea. That area was down yet another set of dirt roads, and the 3 or 4 houses back there didn't have any sort of view of the lake. It was pretty much a cul-de-sac. The other houses had deteriorated badly, but this one, which was set further back than the others, was pretty much pristine. But I just immediately got a bad vibe, and I'd never particularly liked that area. Something about it just bothered me, even more so than the camp area, but the 3 of us, myself, M, and D, we all pressed on. This was before the advent of smartphones, mind you, so we had one flashlight between the 3 of us. We rode our bikes to the area in the dark. The moonlight was bright enough to light the way, but we actually expected the house to be locked. And it was just too immaculate. Like, whereas while the other trailer homes that weren't starting to decay were still recognizable as a former home, they were trashed, in other words. There were holes in the walls, graffiti tags, ripped up furniture, and things like that. This one had none of that. And I remember the events as they happened perfectly. So we carefully leaned our bikes against the right side of the house, as the stairs leading to the front door were slightly closer to that side, and though we may have been headstrong, we weren't stupid. We knew that there was always a chance of running into a drug addict or a panicked homeless person or something. And so I used to keep a short baseball bat along the frame of my bike, as we often rode in a deserted area for miles at a time. But for whatever reason, that night I didn't have it. It wouldn't have really mattered anyway, but it's just a slight detail. D had the flashlight, and he immediately lit up the area when we got off our bikes. Em and I were a little bit annoyed by this, as it kind of wrecked our night vision. You know, if you spend enough time in the dark, your eyes start to adjust. Well, he just undid that. And that just added to the bad feeling that I already had. But we slowly made our way around the house to the steps leading to the front door, and I remember saying that it was going to be locked as I touched the handle, and it wasn't. I opened the door a few inches and looked back at M and D, and we just kind of looked at each other and gave a slight nod, and then went in. I opened the door, and D went in with the flashlight, and M immediately called out, "Hey, is anyone here?" I remember asking him, "Dude, what the hell?" because we'd been trying to be as quiet as possible. But then I saw what he was seeing. The door opened into the living room, and the interior was immaculate. There was no clear indication that the house had ever been abandoned, in fact, beside it being on a condemned property with an overgrown exterior and the surrounding homes collapsing in on themselves. The furniture was perfect. There was one of those old school and big screen projection TVs that wasn't smashed. The kitchen, which we could see from the door, looked immaculately clean. And for whatever reason, we actually laughed about this, saying, "Holy crap, everything else is scared off this place too. They haven't even touched it." But despite being a trailer home though, it was pretty big, and had a fireplace in fact. I used my flip phone for what little light I could and got to work attempting to start a small fire to better light the area, while Em took the flashlight and went on making sure that we were really alone. D was sitting on the couch behind me, texting his girlfriend or something, I think. And eventually I just gave up on the fire and went to sit on the couch next to D. We sat there for a few moments before hearing Em calling us into another room. Now, I don't know why, but I just had an immense sense of dread at this point. I was sure that he had found something horrible, and my imagination just went wild as D and I stumbled towards the one-lit room, lit from Em's flashlight, down the hall. When we got there, we saw Em staring at the wall to the right of the doorway. The flashlight wasn't even trained on the wall, it was just hung limply in his hand. And I had never seen him show fear before, but I could tell that he was horrified. "Em, what's wrong?" I asked quietly, and the wall had what had to have been just hundreds of knives of every type, mostly large kitchen knives though, just stabbed into it. Some appeared to be done in patterns, and others were just completely random. I was speechless, and it was as if someone had taken every knife from every abandoned home in the area and put it into this wall. But it gets worse. Before we had a chance to say anything, Em turned around, shining the light on the opposite wall, and now, it may have been red paint, but as I said, I'm a mechanic and I restore cars for a living, and I've never seen red paint dry like what I'm about to describe. But in dark red, paint or otherwise, were just written all kinds of random letters and symbols and numbers, all framing a large, messily written sentence in the center of the wall. And it said, "Leave the house, now." I'll happily admit that I was horrified. So was D, and M just seemed lost, almost like he didn't know how to process the emotion of fear, because, as I said, he just wasn't that type. He actually later joined the military and was put in special forces units. I turned to leave, and D grabbed M by the arm and pulled him along with us, and he was saying that he didn't feel well and that he needed to sit for a second. D and I just wanted to get the heck out of that house. Hell, out of the whole town, in fact. But M's days, which I now recognize was an anxiety attack, worried us, and we sat him down on the couch. We assumed that we'd be fine, but we still wanted to get the heck out of there. After sitting there for what seemed like forever, but was probably only about 2 minutes, it happened. We heard voices. All three of us heard them too, and it sounded like two men having a heated conversation, and we just went dead silent. And then we heard footsteps on the front steps. This snapped M straight out of the daze. We were up so quickly that everything just became a blur at this point. There were sliding glass doors in the kitchen area that led to the backyard, so we just slammed them open and just ran like hell around the side of the house, grabbed our bikes, looking back, expecting to see 2 drug addicts or cultists, and we didn't see anybody. Nothing out of place. I remember stopping dead in my tracks and mouthing, "What the heck," under my breath, and M's fear had been replaced by adrenaline, and he was more angry than anything, and he started calling out, "Hey, if there's anyone out there, come out, I'm serious, come out now," as he looked all over the area with the flashlight. But, as far as we could tell, there was nobody there. There was nobody anywhere, in fact. Now, we couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds to get up and out and around the house, and we were obviously very loud as we did so in a panic. So, I guess it's possible that someone heard us and they just ran off. But M, still on adrenaline rage, said, "Screw it," and picked up a 2x4 on the ground, and he charged right back into the house and repeated his earlier statements. He came back about a minute later, and apparently there was nobody in the house. We were so bothered by this that we didn't actually do the obvious and run like hell. With the one flashlight and our cell phones and a torch that I made out of a piece of wood and some fabric and lighter fluid that my friend had for the fire that we had earlier, we combed the entire area of the house and came up with absolutely nothing. I still, to this day, have no idea what the hell went on in that room. I have no idea what those voices and footsteps were. I'm a skeptic at heart, and I've since been in much more foreboding abandoned places, but I've never experienced a feeling of fear like that again. Anyway, after this, we still hung out near the lake, but we stuck to the one area where other kids hung out too. Eventually, we grew up and apart, and he moved, and M&D joined the military, and I went on with life. On one leave trip Em had about 2 years later, we decided to revisit the lake though. By this time, the train tracks were gone and being replaced with what was now a nature and cyclist trail, and some of the houses had been bulldozed. It was clear that the lake as we knew it wouldn't be around for much longer. And nothing strange was happening, and all was well until, at one point, just walking our dirt bikes through an area it would have been nearly impossible to ride through as well, we heard a massive thunder-like sound. It was so loud that it just kind of shook the ground, and it rattled the windows in abandoned homes around us. It was a bright, clear day, and It was louder than any thunder that I've heard, and the sound was heard by myself, Em, and a friend of his, and my ex-girlfriend. My immediate reaction, and always the skeptic, right, was a sonic boom, as we do live somewhat near an airbase. M had actually spent the last year of his life on an aircraft carrier dealing with jets daily, and all he said was that was not a sonic boom, and he never brought it up again. We visited a few more times, but more and more of the development was being leveled and replanted with trees to make it more aesthetically pleasing for the nature trail. But about 2 years ago, I and a friend drove back there to see if there was anything left, and every single building, including the Hermit's home, was just completely gone. I mean, you would have never even known that it existed, any of it. I parked my car on the dirt road, the car that I'd had at the time being a large, old, very loud muscle car, painted in a thick coat of matte black, and this is important because after we hopped the gate on the dirt road, which was now connected to a chain-link fence that ran the entire massive perimeter of the lake, and did a bit of a walk around, trying to picture where certain buildings or items had been, we returned to the car and we found something unexpected. There were scratches resembling claw marks, almost like a cat scratch, but humanly sized and spaced, on the passenger side of the fender of the car, on a tough matte black finish. And at this point, I'm absolutely certain of two things. The first being that I did not hit or brush anything on the way in to make those marks. And second, that I'm absolutely certain that I never want to go back to that lake again. So, this is my father's story, and he wasn't a long-haul trucker or anything, but rather an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s. And without a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. So the gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift, 11 to 7, I think. My guy comes in, and he gives him the creeps, and seems really sketchy. He was wearing a tight jacket and pants, and you could tell that he had something in his pants under his jacket. Plus, it was during the summer and it was warm, so why was he wearing a jacket to begin with? A lot of truck drivers used this station as it was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let the truckers park and sleep or take a break. So on this night, at this time, it was just my dad, the sketchy dude, and one trucker in there that he kinda knew. As in, came in frequent enough to be conversational with. And asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stock shelves for several many minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and just got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booze that they had to eat a sandwich from. I should also point out that this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States and the 1970s. CB and landline was it, and my dad only had a landline in that store. So the hours passed and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when, all of a sudden, this truck driver comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, sprints into the store hollering that he needs a phone. He calls 911 to report that he had walked into a gas station 40 miles back, the next closest station, to find the attendant shot and dead, and no one else was around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently, they eventually apprehended the guy in the blue car, and my dad confirms that it was indeed sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charged him with murder and armed robbery. So, to the long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thank you, and I hope you're doing well. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before, and were inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house surrounded by woods and dirt road, and the house itself gave me just an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off, the paint on the house seemed to be fading, It was honestly just an old piece of crap now that I think about it. But at the time, I was excited. I remember walking in after I stared at the house for what seemed like 20 minutes, and surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the outside, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. One thing I do remember distinctly about the house, though, is the smell. I can't pinpoint it, but it was just different, like walking into a musty room or something. I started to walk around and just explore my surroundings, but I noticed Kat's mum was watching me. I simply smiled, waved, but she just kind of stood there, staring at me wide-eyed. I'd never met her before, but why was she staring at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me. We both fell and started giggling, and I noticed Kat's mum out of the corner of my eye start to turn around and walk off. And she was gone, just like that. So fast forward a couple of hours, and Kat and I are laying in a beanbag in her room just watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favourite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King movies, or any movie my mum was watching at the time. It wasn't her decision, it was mine, because I love the feeling that a good horror movie gives you. Anyway, she felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. We were sitting here watching the movie, and suddenly the door opposite us just slams closed. We both jumped, giggled, and brushed it off because, well, we were kids. Until the second time when it creaked open and slammed again, not even seconds after the first time. Now, I'm sitting there staring at this door, trying to figure out how the hell is this door opening and closing by itself. In the midst of all of that, the only other person in this house was her mum, which I figured out earlier was just a tad bit creepy. So naturally, I asked her, "You think that it's your mum?" But she just shook her head. I asked, "Are you sure?" again, but she said something that gave me chills, and still gives me chills just telling this story. She said, "My mum isn't home, it's just me and you, silly." I just stare at her while she's staring at me, just trying to wrap my head around what she just said. I mean, who leaves their 9-year-old home alone with a good friend in a 2-story house? So I ask her, "Where is your mum?" and she says, "She's at work." I giggled at this point, thinking that she was just trying to trick me because we were watching a horror movie, but she says, "She's at work. She only works for a couple of hours, so she leaves me here because she trusts me." And at this point, I'm just looking at her, and she noticed this look of worry on my face. And she asked, "What's wrong?" I said to her, "If your mum is at work, then who was that lady that was staring at me earlier?" And as I said this, we heard what seemed like footsteps at the time. But thinking about it now, it kind of sounded like shuffling in one spot, above us. And at this point, I'm completely terrified, and every hair on my neck is standing out, and I just want to leave. I start to get up when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I heard that noise, and I nodded, and it was silent again, until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both stared up at the ceiling, and she grabbed my hand, and then she whispered that this happens every day. I look over at her and can truly see the fear on her face. The footsteps stopped, and she looked at me, and her face just kind of flushed white. I asked her, "Is there an attic there?" And she pointed upwards towards the ceiling, and, well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds, I kept thinking over and over. You ever notice when you're just really quiet that's when you can hear almost everything around you? Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend, alone at 10 years old, and you then hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no younger brothers or sisters, and we were definitely completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was, and I remember thinking that I just wanted to get out of this house at this point. So I just grab her and I run out the door. I mean, at least we would feel safer and less scared outside the house than we would in it, right? While we were outside, Kat asked me if I wanted to hear a story, pulling my mind back into reality, and I nodded. She said, "Well, this house used to be a daycare, and there was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them in the attic and then hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. Apparently, they all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty and no one found them for months afterwards. And it all happened in this house. Upon hearing this, my heart started to pound and my eyes were wide with fear, and I just looked at her and she said that it was true. I've seen them, the little kids, every day, but I've never seen the lady, but you have earlier. And after she told me this, I don't remember much else. Kat followed me around, begging me to stay, but I just had to go. My stomach felt like knots, and I felt as if I walked into a horror movie myself and just wished this day had never happened. Anyway, I eventually went home, and that was pretty much the end of it. Fast forward a few years later, though, the day was the last day that I'd seen or heard from Kat, and I remember her always coming to play outside at my dad's during the day. I remember what she looked like. I never remember meeting her parents or seeing them out in public. I'm 27 now, and I can't seem to find any proof that she ever existed as well. All my friends that I was friends with then, and I'm still friends with now, even after all these years, they don't know anything about her. I've driven by that house maybe 15 times, and the house definitely exists. I was about 9 at the time, I think, and my mother had just gone up to the UPS store to send a package and leave. But there wasn't many people there, so she figured that I could be left in the car for a minute or two. There weren't that many people there, so she figured that I could be left in the car for a minute or two. For setting, I was in the car, windows halfway rolled up, since it was summer and my mother is a smart lady, and it was a fairly empty parking lot. So a lady pulls up in a very high truck with American flag stickers on it, and I wasn't really paying any attention to her until I heard her window roll down. I noticed her out of the corner of my eye, just kind of staring me down, and I glance over at her, discovering her slowly licking her lips. She then starts to speak, and the conversation went a little like this. So the lady said, My, you're a pretty young lady, and I kind of awkwardly say thanks. The lady says, I had a granddaughter who looked just like you, and I said, cool, and then she said, my grandson is actually cooking dinner right now. I came to pick up the final ingredients. And I was like, oh, that's nice, I guess. She said, do you want to come to my house for dinner, and I have a good feeling you'll like it. I say, no thanks, I already ate. And then she says, I'm just trying to be friendly, come on, you'll love it. And then I say, oh look, there's my mum. My mother walks to the car and the lady says to my mum, your daughter's really pretty. And at this point, she just drives off slowly, still staring at me. Her truck follows us for a while until we get inside, and then she just kind of speeds off. And that night, I heard loud tapping noises on my window and footsteps outside. Our neighbours also said that they saw some shady character sneaking around. We never did see her again after that, and after that night, everything stopped, but what the heck was she up to? G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.